The klaxon started before anyone had a reason for it, and by the time Corporal Ashek understood what the sound meant, the thing was already 3 decks below him and moving. He had been leaning against the rail of the number 4 gantry with his stun lance racked and his mind on the end of his shift, watching a stevedore crew break down a pallet of grain drums in the flat white light of the cargo dome. Ordinary work. Boring work. The kind of duty the Sarek security branch handed to corporals who had not yet done anything to distinguish themselves. Then one of the stevedores, a squat pink-cheeked Prael loader named Anu, dropped a drum, and instead of cursing and reaching for it, Anu went very still and looked down into the dark seam between the lower pallet stacks where the deck lights did not reach. Ashek would remember later that Anu did not scream. Anu simply set both broad hands flat on the crate in front of him, the way a person braces on a table before he faints, and said, in a small, clear voice that carried all the way up the gantry, "There is something in the low stacks." Then the eyes opened in the dark, and the alarm went off, and after that nothing in the depot was ordinary again. Cervantes was a supply station, not a warship. That distinction had never mattered to Ashek before, and it mattered enormously now. It was a great slow ring of a place. A coalition allocation depot hung in daylight orbit above the deathworld Anet, and everything about it had been built to move cargo, and nothing about it had been built to fight. The dome over the main transfer floor was 100 meters of clear laminate, and through it the planet stood enormous and green-white and close, its cloud belts lit hard by the local sun, so that the whole cargo floor swam in a bright, shadowless noon that never changed. 12,000 souls worked the rings. They loaded protein, machine parts, water ice, seed stock. They did not carry weapons, most of them, and the ones who did carried them the way Ashek did, as a formality. There was not supposed to be anything alive aboard Cervantes that had come up off Anet. That was the first rule. That was the rule the whole depot was built around. You did not bring live things up the well from a Class 12 deathworld. You brought soil samples in sealed casks, and you brought mineral, and you brought sometimes, under triple quarantine, dead specimens for the survey labs, and you burned anything that so much as twitched. Ashek had signed the induction card that said so. Everyone had. It was the one line of station doctrine that even the laziest loader could recite, because Anet was the kind of place that ate the people who studied it. In 11 years, the survey service had put 9 teams down on the surface and brought 4 of them back. The others were a column of names on a plaque by the chapel ring, and the reason the plaque existed at all was that there had never been bodies to bury. And now something off Anet was in the low stacks of Bay 12, and it had just opened its eyes, and Ashek's stun lance suddenly felt like a stick. "Contact, contact, Bay 12 low deck," he said into his throat mic, and was distantly proud that his voice held. "Uncatalogued animal, large, moving. All non-security personnel evacuate the transfer floor. This is not a drill." Below him the stevedore crew was already running, drums abandoned, and that was the first mistake, though no one could have blamed them for it. Ashek saw the shape come up out of the seam in the pallets the way water comes up out of a broken pipe, fast and low and wrong, and he saw the stack of grain drums shudder and go over as it passed them, and then it was gone into the machine dark under the number 3 conveyor, and the stevedores running had turned it from a frightened animal in a hole into a hunter with things to chase. Ashek knew that even as it happened. He did not know how he knew. Some old part of him under the training knew. "Do not run," he said uselessly to 12 terrified people who could not hear him. "Do not." The whole gantry rang like a bell as something struck a support column 2 decks down, and the lights in the low deck stuttered, and a woman on the loading crew went down and was hauled up by her collar by the Prael, Anu, who had not run at all, who had stayed to pull people out of the aisle, and Ashek made a note in the part of his mind that kept notes that the loader Anu was braver than he was. Then the emergency bulkheads began to come down, slow gray slabs dropping from the ceiling with a groan of hydraulics, sealing the transfer floor section by section, an Ashek squad channel filled with voices all talking at once. Thermal signature is huge. It's reading like a get the doors sealed. We push it into the low bays and we hold it. Command wants a species ident. Does anyone have eyes? Does anyone have a clean? Nobody has clean eyes, Ashek said, cutting across them, and the channel went quiet the way a channel does when one person is standing where the thing actually is. It came up out of the pallets. It's under the conveyors now. It's fast. It knocked a support column at the base and it's not tired. Tell command it's not tired. There was a pause, and then his section lead, Sergeant Vol, came on, and Vol's voice had the flat, careful sound of an officer reading a doctrine card off the back of his own eyes. Corporal, confirm the induction breach. Confirm we have a live import off the surface. I can't confirm what it is, Ashek said, but it came up in a cargo intake, Sergeant, and it's the biggest living thing I have ever seen indoors, and it is not one of ours. Understood. A breath. Command is going to red alert. The whole ring changed color. Ashek had drilled the red alert 40 times and had never once believed in it. Now the white noon light of the dome dropped away, and the deck strips came up in that deep arterial red that the manual said reduced glare and steadied the nerves and did neither. And the station's calm female voice, the one that told you your shuttle was boarding and your rations were ready, said, in exactly the same warm tone, that all personnel were to shelter in place, that the transfer rings were under quarantine lockdown, that this was a Class 12 containment event, that this was not a drill. She said it 4 times. By the 4th time, Ashek could hear people on the open channels beginning to understand what Class 12 meant, and the understanding moved through them like cold water, and here and there it turned into the high, thin sound of somebody's discipline coming apart. He climbed down off the gantry into the red dark and went to find his people, and he did his job, which for the next hour was the ugly, unglamorous work of pushing frightened cargo crews into shelter rooms and dogging the hatches behind them and reading names off a manifest to make sure the names were behind doors. It was, he thought, a strange thing to be doing, while a Class 12 apex predator loose-hunted the lower decks of a station that could not fight. But it was the work in front of him, so he did it. It was during this hour that he first saw the human going the wrong way. Her name was on the manifest as Ostrander, W, Supply Officer 2nd, and she was not supposed to be anywhere near the low bays, and she walked toward them with a ration crate under one arm and the unbothered rolling gait of a person heading down to storage to settle a paperwork dispute. Ashek saw her on the corridor monitor from the shelter room checkpoint where he was dogging hatches, and for a moment he did not believe the monitor. The station had gone to red alert. 12,000 people were behind doors or trying to be. And here, on the descent ramp to the sealed low bays, the exact deck the containment channel was screaming about, was a single small human in a supply officer's soft gray coveralls, walking down, against the flow, against every arrow the alert system was painting on the floor, as calmly as if she were the only person on the whole station who had not heard the news. Humans were still a novelty on the coalition rings in those days, and Caravantes had exactly 6 of them, all logistics and supply, all quiet, all famously unbothered by things that bothered everyone else. Ashek had shared a canteen table with 2 of them once, and had come away with the private opinion that humans were pleasant and strange and slightly hard to read, the way a still pond is hard to read. This one he had seen before without ever learning her name, small, even for a human, brown, plain-faced hair scraped back and tied off, a smudge of hydraulic grease on one cheek that she had clearly had there for hours and could not be troubled to wipe. She did not look like anything. That was the thing he would try to explain afterward to people who had not been there. She did not look like anything at all. She looked like a person you would step around in a corridor and forget. You, Ashek said into the corridor channel because it was the only channel he had that reached her. Supply Officer, Ostrander, You are walking into a containment zone. Turn around and shelter." She stopped. She looked up, found the monitor eye, and looked into it with a mild, patient expression. The expression of a person who has been interrupted in the middle of a task by someone who does not understand the task. "There are 2 crews still working the low bays," she said. 14 and 19. They came on at the shift change and they don't have the alert on their local because the low bay repeaters have been down for a week. I filed the ticket. Nobody fixed the ticket. A small dry beat. So they don't know. Somebody has to go tell them. "That is a security function," Ashek said. "You will shelter. We will clear the low bays." "Will you?" she said. It was not quite a question and not quite a challenge. It was the flat human way of saying a thing that Ashek would come to know very well over the following hours, the way of stating a fact and leaving it in the air for you to walk into. "Corporal, with respect, your people are sealing bulkheads and reading names off a list. Nobody is going down. I've watched the deck map for 6 minutes. The low bays are dark and there are 9 names still in them, and the only reason nobody's screaming yet is that they don't know to." "Because it is not survivable down there," Ashek said, and heard his own voice climb and hated it. "Officer, there is a class 12. "I know what's down there," she said. She said it the way you'd say you knew, where the spare filters were kept. And then, while Ashek was still finding the next word, she shifted the ration crate to her other arm, turned, and went down the ramp into the red dark, and the monitor eye lost her at the turn. Ashek stood at his hatch checkpoint with his hand on the dogging wheel, and a cold, specific certainty settling into him that he had just watched a small, brave, stupid person walk to her death, and that there was nothing in his authority or his weapon or his training that could have stopped her, and that the last thing she had said to him, in the flat human way, was that she knew what was down there. He did not, then, understand what she had meant. He would spend the rest of his life understanding it. Overseer Dune ran the depot from a glass tier above the transfer floor, and Overseer Dune was, at that moment, watching the worst hour of his career assemble itself out of red light and bad options, and he was doing it with his hands folded, because if he unfolded them the tier staff would see them shake. Dune was old for a prail and had run supply stations for most of his life, and he had built a whole self out of the belief that a well-kept depot never had a worst hour. You planned. You maintained. You inducted cargo through the proper locks, and you burned what needed burning, and you never, ever let the thing that could not happen begin to happen, because the thing about the things that could not happen was that they only had to happen once. He had a plaque of his own philosophy on the wall behind him. In fact, a line of old Prail logistics doctrine that said a depot at rest is a depot that has done its work. He had believed it for 40 years. There was an apex predator off a Class 12 deathworld loose in his low bays, and it had come up through his cargo intake, which meant it had come up through his procedures, which meant that somewhere in his beautifully kept depot a rule he was responsible for had failed weeks ago and nobody had caught it. And now the worst hour was here, and the doctrine on the wall was just a line on a plaque. "Talk to me," he said to the tier. They talked. It was not good. The thing command had stopped pretending it might be a large loose draft animal about 40 minutes ago, was somewhere in the maze of the low bays, and the low bays were the oldest, densest, worst mapped part of the station, a warren of pallet canyons and conveyor throats and maintenance crawls stacked 4 decks deep. And the thermal picture they had of it was terrifying, not because it was large, though it was large, but because of how it moved. It did not blunder. It did not rage against the bulkheads. It flowed through the dark of the low bays like it had been born in exactly that kind of dark, choosing seams, avoiding the lit aisles, going quiet when the security teams pushed and moving when they pulled back. And the containment officer, a thin, nervous Sarek named Pell, had said the thing aloud that everyone in the tier was thinking and no one wanted logged. "It's not trapped, Overseer," Pell had said. "We keep saying we've sealed it in. We haven't sealed it in, it's staying." Staying. It could have pushed a dozen of these bulkheads, The strike readings on the support column, it can hit hard enough to buckle structure. It's not hitting the doors. It's not trying to get out. Pell swallowed. It went down there for a reason, and it's staying for a reason, and I don't know what the reason is, and I don't like not knowing. Dune did not like it either. But Dune was a supply man, and a supply man's whole art was the art of the least bad option under a bad clock, and so he made himself stop staring at the thermal ghost sliding through his low bays and start counting his options, which were few. They could not fight it hand to hand. That had been established in the first 10 minutes, when a stun lance team had cornered what they thought was the animal in a conveyor throat, and it had turned out to be a shadow, and the lance team had come back up 2 men short of composure and reporting that their charges had done nothing, that the thing had simply not been where they aimed. They could not gas the whole low bay complex fast enough to matter. The ventilation down there was old and compartmented, and it would take a cryo flood the better part of an hour to fill, and an hour was a long time to leave a Class 12 loose. They could seal the low bays off entirely and vent them to space, and this was the option that Dune's operations chief kept circling back to, quietly, in the flat voice people use for the option they are ashamed of, because venting the low bays would kill the thing for certain, and it would also open the question of who was still down there. Personnel accounting, Dune said. Low bays now. The answer took too long and came back wrong. The low bay muster was a mess. The repeaters were down, an old maintenance ticket, unfixed, one of 1,000 small unfixed things in a depot the size of a town, and the shift change had put 2 fresh crews on the low decks who were not showing on the shelter rolls and were not answering hails, and the count of names still unaccounted for below the sealed line stood at 11 and would not come down. 11. Plus, the muster added a moment later. In the toneless way the muster system added things. One supply officer who had badged down through the descent locked 9 minutes into the alert and had not badged back. Who badges down during a Class 12 alert? Dune said to no one. Human overseer, said the muster tech. Ostrander, supply second, she's the badge trail has her below the sealed line, deep. She's in the low bays. Dune looked at the thermal picture, at the great smooth ghost of the thing flowing through the dark of his low bays, and at the little cold nothing of a human badge trace moving down through the same dark toward it, and he felt the specific vertigo of a man watching 2 numbers he cannot separate begin to converge. And he said the thing that command men say when they have run out of good options and are looking for a person to blame the shape of the disaster on. Get me the warden, Dune said. If we have a live Class 12 aboard, we do this by the book. Wake the K-Thali. Tell Warden Osk his hour has come. Warden Osk of the K-Thali Beast Corps arrived on the transfer tier 40 minutes later with an escort, a hard-shelled equipment sled, and the settled contempt of a professional summoned to clean up an amateur's mess. He was a big male of a big species, plated along the back and forearms in the deep bronze of a decorated veteran, and he came onto the tier already talking, which Dune would remember, because the talking was the first sign that Osk had made up his mind about the situation before he had seen it. The K-Thali ran the Coalition's war beast programs. They were the ones who took the culled predators of a dozen worlds and broke them and bonded them, and turned them into the armored hunting animals that walked at the flank of Coalition Marines. And Osk had 30 years of that behind him and a bonded beast of his own on the sled. A low, broad, slate-gray killer called Grail that he had raised from a pup on a leash of pain and reward, and that would. He assured the tier, find the intruder, corner the intruder, and hold the intruder for disposal. Because that was what bonded war beasts were for, and that was what amateurs with stun lances could not do. You have a feral, Osk said, standing in the red light with his hands on his belt, looking down at the thermal picture the way a man looks at a problem beneath him. An uncatalogued feral off the surface, panicking in an unfamiliar warren. This is not complicated, Overseer, whatever your people have made of it. A frightened animal in a maze wants 2 things. It wants a hole to hide in, and it wants everyone to stop chasing it. My grail will give it neither. We will move it, we will fix it, we will end it. By this time tomorrow you will be signing my invoice and wondering why you red alerted a station over a loose animal. It buckled a support column, Dune said. Frightened animals are strong. It has avoided every door it could have broken. It is not trying to leave. Something moved behind Osk's flat bronze eyes at that, some small professional recalibration, but he covered it with contempt, which was, Dune would come to learn, the thing Osk did with everything he did not immediately understand. Then it has found something down there it wants more than escape, Osk said. Warmth, a carcass, a nest site, it makes no difference. Grail does not care what it wants. Grail cares what I want. He turned to his sled and put one plated hand flat on the housing, and there was, for just a moment, real tenderness in it, the tenderness of a man for the one creature in the galaxy he had bent entirely to himself. Open the descent lock. We go down. There are personnel below the line, Dune said, 11 unaccounted, and a supply officer who went down on her own. Osk paused, went down. During the alert toward the animal. Osk looked at him for a long moment with an expression Dune could not read across the gulf of species, and then he said flatly, "Then she is already dead, Overseer, and you should not let the fact of a corpse slow the work. The best thing I can do for the 11 is to end the animal before it finds them. Open the lock." Dune opened the lock. He would think about that decision for a long time. Down in the red dark of the low bays, the small human that everyone above had already buried was crouched on her heels in the mouth of a conveyor throat, unwrapping a protein biscuit, and talking quietly to the largest predator on the station, as if it were a slightly nervous dog that had gotten into the pantry. Ren Ostrander was not brave in the way the Sarek corporal thought she was, and she was not stupid in the way the warden thought she was, and she was very tired of both of those being the only two things aliens ever decided she could be. What she was correct. She had spent 6 weeks being correct about exactly this, quietly, alone, on the deck below everyone's attention, and now the whole station had finally caught up to the thing she had known since the 3rd week of the shipping season, and they had caught up to it in the worst possible way, at full alarm, with weapons. And she was down here trying to keep the correct thing from becoming a slaughter. "There you are," she said low, not looking directly at the shape in the dark because looking directly at it was a challenge, and she had learned that in the 1st week. I know it's loud up there. It's loud everywhere. They found you. I told you they'd find you if you went up top, and you went up top anyway, and now look." The shape in the dark of the conveyor throat shifted, and a great flat head came forward into the edge of the red light, and if Corporal Ashek had been there to see it, he would have understood, finally, why the stevedores had not screamed but had only gone still, because the thing was terrible and it was also, unmistakably, listening. It was the size of a draft animal, but built nothing like one, low and long and banded in muscle under a hide the deep wet green-black of the Annette forests, and it moved with the appalling economy of something that had never in its life needed a second try at anything. Its head was broad and blunt and full of a quiet, patient intelligence that had nothing of the pet in it and everything of the apex, and along its jaw and down its heavy shoulders ran the pale seamed lines of old scars, the record of a life lived at the top of the worst food chain in the surveyed galaxy. One of those scars, along the left flank, was newer than the rest and ran clean and healed, and Wren had put the salve on that one herself, 6 weeks ago, when the thing had been half the size it was now and wedged near dead in a cargo container, and bleeding out through a wound that a supply officer had absolutely no business treating, and every regulation in the book required her to report. She had not reported it. She thought about that, sometimes, in the flat, honest way she thought about most things. She had opened the container on a routine intake check, expecting spoiled grain, and had found instead a young apex predator from a Class 12 world crushed and starving and looking up at her out of the dark with an eye the size of her fist. And the induction card in her breast pocket had said, very clearly, that the correct and legal and survivable thing to do was to seal the container, call it in, and let them run it out the airlock or burn it in the incinerator with the rest of the quarantine failures. And she had looked at it for a while, the small crushed terrible thing, and she had thought about her grandfather's farm on Delacroix, which was a hard world, a cold, heavy world, a world the coalition surveys had also once tried to call a death world before humans went and lived on it anyway. And she had thought about the winter she was 9, when a storm-panicked draft mare had gone into the drainage ditch and lain there for a day and a night with a broken hock, huge and thrashing and lethal in her fear. And how everyone said put her down, and how her grandfather had instead gone down into the ditch in the dark with a bucket of warm mash and sat with the mare for 6 hours until she stopped being a danger and started being an animal again, and had walked her out at dawn. You don't kill a thing for being frightened, her grandfather had said. Frightened isn't the same as dangerous, girl. Frightened is what dangerous looks like before somebody's kind to it. So she had not reported the container. She had cleaned the wound and packed the flank and left food, and she had come back the next shift expecting to find either a dead animal or a lost hand, and had found instead the thing watching her from the back of the container with its ears. It had things like ears, folded flaps of muscle along the skull, laid flat not in threat, but in the wary hope of an animal that has decided, provisionally, to see what you do next. And she had done, for 6 weeks, the only thing she knew how to do with a frightened, dangerous thing, which was to be the same every day. Same time, same voice, same hand. Food set down and stepped back from, never cornered, never cooed at, never lied to. She talked to it the way she talked to everything, dry and level, and without much hope of an answer. And somewhere in the 3rd week, she had realized that the thing was arranging its whole day around her rounds, that it had learned her step on the deck plates from 40 meters, that when she came down the ramp, its great banded shoulders dropped out of their permanent readiness into something that on any earth animal she would have called relief. She had named it in the 4th week. She had not meant to. Naming a thing was admitting you were keeping it, and she had known even then that she could not keep it, that this could only ever end in the incinerator or the airlock or something worse. But it had developed by the 4th week, the specific and undignified habit of stealing protein biscuits off the ration pallets when her back was turned, a Class 12 apex predator, the terror of a death world palming dry survival crackers like a raccoon in a campground. And one evening she had turned around to catch it mid-theft, both of them frozen, the biscuit ridiculous and small in that terrible mouth, and she had heard herself say, tired and fond and doomed, "Biscuit, you are unbelievable." And that had been that. After that it was biscuit, and after a thing has a name you have already lost the argument with yourself. And Wren had known, crouching there in the 4th week watching the most dangerous animal in the sector chew a stolen cracker with the guilty enthusiasm of a farm dog, that she was going to try to save it, and that it was probably going to cost her everything she had, and that she was going to do it anyway, because that was who her grandfather had raised, and there was no changing it now. Now it was the 6th week, and the alarm was screaming 3 decks up, and Warden Osk of the Cathali Beast Corps was coming down the descent lock with a war beast on a leash to end the frightened thing, and Wren Ostrander finished unwrapping the protein biscuit and held it out flat on her palm into the red dark and said, quietly, "Come here then. Let me look at you. We've got about 10 minutes before this gets stupid, and I need you calm, and I need you to trust me one more time, and then I'm going to try something that is probably going to end my career." Biscuit came out of the conveyor throat, put its great blunt head down against her shoulder with a gentleness that would have stopped the heart of anyone watching, and took the biscuit off her palm with lips as careful as a horse's. "Good," Wren said, and rested her forehead a moment against the scarred jaw of the thing that could have removed her arm in the time it took to blink, and neither of them for that moment was afraid of anything. "Good, okay. Here's the plan. Corporal Ashek was the one who found the Low Bay crews in the end, and it was finding them that broke the first crack in what the whole station thought it knew. He had disobeyed a standing order to do it. When the muster came back with 11 names below the sealed line, and no one moving to get them, Ashek had looked at his section lead's careful doctrine-reading face, and had understood that Sergeant Vall was not going to send anyone down, that the plan above the line had quietly become the plan of waiting for the warden to end the animal, and then counting the bodies, and that the 11 names were already being spoken of in the past tense in the tier. And Ashek had thought about the human going down the ramp with a ration crate, saying she knew what was down there, saying somebody had to go tell them, and he had found that he could not stand at his hatch checkpoint dogging doors on the living while 11 people he was responsible for waited in the dark for a rescue that the plan had written off. So he had taken 2 volunteers, the loader Anu, who had refused to shelter and attached himself to Ashek's checkpoint and turned out to be steadier than half the security branch, and a young Sarek tech named Ilse who knew the Low Bay maintenance crawls. And he had gone down a service ladder into the sealed section, off the map, off the plan, against the order, to find the crews before either the animal or the warden did. They found Crew 19 first, 5 loaders and a lift operator, huddled in a sealed tool cage in the dark with the emergency loom sticks cracked and glowing, and they were alive, and they were unhurt, and they had a story that Ashek did not know what to do with. It came through, the lift operator said, gripping Ashek's forearm hard enough to bruise. Big, fast, right through the aisle. We thought we were done, there was nowhere to go. He stopped and his throat worked. It looked at us. It stopped in the aisle and it looked right at us and it went around. It went around the cage and it kept going. He couldn't finish. Why did it go around? Ashek did not have an answer. He got them up, got them moving toward the service ladder, and went deeper. And it was in going deeper that the second crack opened, because 2 aisles on he found Crew 14, and Crew 14 was not huddled in a cage. Crew 14 was standing in the open in the red dark, all 4 of them, quite calm, watching something down at the end of a pallet canyon that Ashek could not see, and when he came up on them with his stun lance raised, the foreman turned and put a hand out flat and said, softly, urgently, Don't raise that, don't spook it. She's got it. Don't you dare spook it now." "Who?" Ashek said. "Got what?" "The supply girl," the foreman whispered, and pointed down the dark canyon of pallets, and Ashek followed the point. And at the far end of the aisle, in the last spill of a failing red deck light, a small human was crouched with her hand resting on the flank of the largest predator Ashek had ever seen, and the predator was leaning into her hand, and neither of them was doing anything at all except waiting. And Ashek felt the whole architecture of what he understood about the last 2 hours quietly rearrange itself into a shape he did not yet have a name for. Warden Osk brought his war beast down through the descent lock and into the low bays with the unhurried confidence of a man who had done this on 40 worlds, and his war beast got 11 meters past the lock and would not go 1 meter more. Grail was a killer. Osk had made him a killer with his own hands, had spent 9 years turning a culled predator pup into 200 kilos of disciplined violence that feared nothing on any world Osk had walked him across, and Grail had cornered ferals in cargo holds and hunted deserters through jungle, and stood his ground once against a thing on the Muir Plains that had killed 2 Marines, and Grail had never in 9 years done what he did now, which was to stop. He stopped at the mouth of the low bays with his broad slate head low, and his weight rocked back onto his haunches, and a sound came out of him that Osk had heard exactly twice in 9 years, both times from other beasts, never from his own. A low, continuous keening, the sound of a predator that has met something above it in the order of things and knows it, all the way down in the old animal core of itself, where training does not reach. Grail, Osk put authority into it the whole weight of 9 years. Track. Grail did not track. Grail pressed himself backward against Osk's legs, 200 kilos of trained war beast trying to make itself small, and pointed his blunt muzzle down the dark of the low bays and keened, and would not be moved. And Osk stood in the red dark with his hand on his beast's shuddering shoulder, and felt the first true crack run through the thing he had built his life on. He had told the overseer this was a frightened animal in a maze. He had been right that there was a frightened animal in the maze. He had been wrong about which one. "What is down there?" Osk said very quietly, and it was not contempt now. "Grail, what is down there?" Grail had no answer that a man could hear. But Osk was 30 years a beast warden, and he could read his own animal better than he could read any person, and what he read in the rigid backward press of that trained killer was not the fear of a hunter for prey it might lose. It was the fear of a subordinate for a superior. It was deference. Somewhere down in the dark of the low bays, Grail had scented something, and the something had told Grail, in the wordless grammar of predators that Osk had spent his whole life learning to speak, that it was senior, and that Grail was not going to be hunting anything today. Osk keyed his channel to the tier with a hand that was not quite steady. "Overseer," he said, "revise the threat assessment. This is not a frightened feral." He looked down the dark. "My beast will not enter. In 9 years my beast has never refused a track. Whatever is down here, it is above him. It is above him the way he is above a herd animal. Do you understand what I am telling you? You do not have a loose pet down here. You have an apex, a true apex at the top of a Class 12 chain, and it is calm. And a calm apex in a maze it has chosen is the single most dangerous configuration of animal I have ever been asked to walk toward." There was a silence on the channel. "Warden," Dune said finally, "advise." Osk looked down at his shivering beast, and then down the red dark toward the thing that had made his beast shiver, and he gave the advice that his 30 years demanded, and that he would spend the rest of his life wishing he had not given first. "Withdraw all personnel above the sealed line," Osk said. "Confirm no assets we cannot afford to lose remain below it, and then vent the low bays to space. It is the only method that does not require a living thing to go within reach of that animal. I am sorry, Overseer. There is no clean way to take an apex in its own dark. You do not fight it. You remove the dark and the air together, and you do not go down there at all." Up in the glass tier, Overseer Dune gave the order to prepare the vent, and started the clock, and it was the worst order of his career, and he gave it in a level voice because that was the job. The low bay vent was not a simple thing. It was a deliberate, staged, catastrophic procedure. The sealing of 40 bulkheads, the confirmation of the seals, the spin-down of the section's atmosphere reclaim, and then the blowing of the outer cargo doors to hard vacuum, dumping the entire warren of the low bays and everything in it to space in the space of 90 seconds. It existed for exactly one reason, which was the reason on the induction card, the one rule the whole depot was built around. If something off and it ever got aboard, you did not fight it, you did not negotiate with it, you opened the doors and you gave it back to the void. Dune had certified the procedure 4 times a year for 11 years, and had never once believed he would run it. "Seal confirmation," he said, "walk it bay by bay. And get me a final muster below the line, because I am not blowing those doors with a living person's name unaccounted, warden or no warden." That was the thing that bought the time in the end. That was the thing Dune did right, in an hour when he did so much wrong, and he clung to it afterward. He would not blow the doors on an unconfirmed name. And the muster below the line would not clear, because the muster below the line had a security corporal on it who had gone down off the map against orders, and 2 low bay crews who were supposed to be dead and were instead moving, alive, toward a service ladder, and a supply officer whose badge trace had stopped moving entirely and sat, steady and small and impossible, at the deep end of the low bays, right on top of the great smooth thermal ghost of the animal, not fleeing it, not being consumed by it, simply sitting with it in the dark while the clock ran. "The human trace hasn't moved in 11 minutes, the muster tech said. It's overseer, it's co-located with the animal. It's right on top of it. The two traces are one trace. Then she's dead, said Osk's voice on the channel, flat. And the trace is a warm body cooling next to a warm animal. And you should blow the doors before it finds the crews, overseer. I have told you this. Body's cool, said the muster tech slowly, not to anyone working it out. In 11 minutes a body starts to cool. That trace isn't cooling. That trace is 37 degrees and holding. That's overseer, that's a live human. That's a live human sitting next to it. And into that silence, onto the open command channel, in a mild, dry, slightly bored human voice, as clear as if she were calling in a stock discrepancy, came the supply officer everyone had buried. Kervanti's command, this is Supply Second Ostrander, below the line, low bay 19. A pause, the sound of her shifting her weight. I'd appreciate it if you didn't vent the section I'm sitting in. I've also got Corporal Ashek down here, security, and 2 work crews he pulled out, and 1 very large animal that has had about 9 opportunities to hurt somebody in the last 2 hours and has not taken a single one of them. So before anybody blows any doors, I'd like 90 seconds to explain what you actually have down here, because it is not what the warden thinks it is. And if you vent this section, you are going to kill 9 of your own people and the single most valuable thing that has ever come aboard this station. And you're going to do it because a Catholi's guard dog got scared. The channel, Dune would say later, had never in the station's history been so completely, so totally silent. He looked at the muster board, at the little steady 37-degree trace sitting calm as anything beside the great cool ghost of the animal, and he looked at his operations chief with her hand on the vent authorization, and he did the arithmetic that command men do, the arithmetic of the least bad option under a bad clock, and for the first time in 2 hours the arithmetic changed, because 90 seconds ago every trace below the line had been a corpse to be, and now 9 of them were talking. Hold the vent, Dune said. Overseer Osk began. Hold the vent, Warden. I have 9 live personnel below the line, and I am not going to be the man who vented them on your advice, while one of them was on the channel asking me not to. Dune leaned into the pickup. Supply second. This is Overseer Dune. You have your 90 seconds. I would use them well. My operations chief has her hand on a door, and the only thing holding it is that I do not vent living names. Talk. And down in the red dark, 3 decks below the glass tier, with her hand resting on the scarred flank of the animal that had made a Cathali war beast shake, Ren Ostrander took a breath and started talking, and Corporal Ashek, crouched 10 meters back with his stun lance lowered and his volunteers behind him and 2 rescued work crews at his flank, listened to a small, tired human explain, in a flat farmer's voice with no drama in it anywhere. The thing that was going to change, how the coalition thought about humans for a generation. 6 weeks ago I opened a cargo container on a routine intake and there was a live animal in it, Ren said. Off Anet, half dead, crushed in transit, bleeding out, a young one. By the card I was supposed to seal it and call it in so you could burn it. I didn't. I cleaned it up and I fed it, and I've been feeding it every shift for 6 weeks down here off your cameras. And yes, before anybody says it, I know exactly how many regulations that is. I've had 6 weeks to count them. A dry breath. Its name is Biscuit. I named it Biscuit because it steals crackers. It is sitting next to me right now with its head on my knee. It let 2 work crews walk past it today because they were mine and it knows mine. It let the warden's beast keen at it from the lock and didn't so much as get up. It has been loose on this station for 6 weeks and the total body count is 0. And the total damage is 1 support column it hit today because a stevedore crew screamed and ran and it got frightened. Frightened. That's all this ever was. You red alerted a station and woke up a war corps and put your hand on a vent switch because a scared young animal got loud in a warren, and the entire time, the whole entire time, it has been tame. That is not possible, Osk said on the channel, and his voice had gone strange. You do not tame a Class 12 Apex. You do not bond an adult surface predator off a deathworld. It took me 9 years and the full resources of the Beast Corps to bond a culled asterisk pup. You are a supply clerk. You do not have the tools, the training, the... No, Ren agreed. I don't have any of that. Then how? Osk said, and it was not contempt anymore. It was something closer to grief. The grief of a man watching his life's work turn out to have been the hard way to do a simple thing. How? I fed it and I didn't scream, Ren said. Every day, same time, same voice. I didn't corner it and I didn't lie to it and I didn't ever once let it see me afraid because I wasn't afraid, because where I'm from you don't get to be afraid of the big animals, you just learn them. A pause. Warden, I grew up on a world your surveys tried to call a death world too, before my great-grandparents went and farmed it anyway. Half the animals on my grandfather's land could have killed me. I fed those every morning too. This isn't a Cathali secret. This isn't a war corps technique. This is just how you keep a frightened, dangerous thing from becoming a dead one. You're kind to it on a schedule until the schedule is the safest thing in its world. That's all. That's the whole trick. Your people burn the frightened things. Mine sit with them in the dark until they stop being frightened. That's the only difference between us, and it's the only difference that's ever mattered. The trouble with the truth, Dune thought, was that a station could not run on it. A station ran on procedure, and the procedure for what Supply Second Ostrander had just confessed to was not complicated at all. She had admitted on an open logged command channel to the deliberate concealment of a live Class 12 import in violation of the founding induction protocol of the depot for 6 weeks. That was not a demerit. That was not a reprimand. That was the single most serious offense a person could commit aboard Caervantes, the one offense the whole station existed to prevent, and the procedure for it was as old and as cold as the plaque on Dune's wall. The import was destroyed, the officer was relieved and remanded to the prefecture for judgment, and the depot filed the incident and went back to work. There was no line in the procedure for the import being tame. There was no line in the procedure for the officer being right. Procedure did not have a category for a supply clerk who had quietly done, alone and against the rules, a thing the entire Cathali Beast Corps could not do at all. Overseer. The voice came down from the oversight relay, from the prefecture liaison who had been silently monitoring the channel since the alert went out, a cool clipped onto named serval whose entire function aboard the station was to make sure the station never embarrassed the coalition, and who now had the worst embarrassment in the sector unspooling live on a logged channel. You will vent the section. The confession changes nothing. It aggravates it. You have a self-admitted induction breach, and a live Class 12 aboard a civilian depot. Every hour that animal remains alive is a liability the prefecture will not carry. Vent log the officer's confession, and we will handle the judgment through channels. This is not a negotiation. There are 9 living people in that section, liaison, Dune said. Then get them out and vent. The animal is between them, and the only cleared route out. Then, said Serval, without any change in tone at all, that is regrettable and it does not change the order. You have a War Corps warden on site advising you to vent. You have a prefecture liaison instructing you to vent. You have one supply clerk, a self-confessed criminal asking you not to. Weigh those, overseer, and vent. And Dune, who had run supply stations for 40 years on the principle that a depot at rest is a depot that has done its work, looked at the little steady 37-degree trace on the muster board, and at the 8 other live traces gathered around it, and at the great calm cool ghost of the animal that had not, in 2 hours, killed a single one of them, and he found, somewhat to his own surprise, that at the end of 40 years, he was going to be the kind of man who did not vent living people on the word of anyone who was not in the room with them. Noted for the log, liaison, Dune said. I am not venting 9 living personnel. I am pursuing extraction. If the prefecture wishes to relieve me for it, the prefecture may relieve me when this is over. Until then, this is my depot and those are my people, and I do not blow doors on names that are still talking to me." He turned off the oversight relay before Serval could answer, which was itself a small career-ending thing, and he did it without regret. And then he turned to the tier and said, "Warden, if we are not venting, then you are going to help me get them out alive. Advise. And this time advise me as if the people down there are people." Osk was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, the contempt was gone out of him entirely, burned off somewhere down in the dark by the sight of his own beast refusing a track, and what was left was a professional working a problem he had badly misjudged and knew it. "Then we extract the animal, not the people," Osk said. "The people cannot move past it, and we cannot ask it to move on the clerk's word alone. I will not stake 9 lives on a clerk's affection for a class 12. So we take the animal out of the equation. I have a remote sedation rig on my sled, a rail-fired dart, heavy dose, keyed for large-mass predators. We sight it above the section, we get a clean line, we put the animal down soft, and while it sleeps we walk the people out and secure it in a containment cradle for transport. Nobody goes within reach. Nobody vents. The animal lives sedated, contained, but alive, and your clerk gets her miracle beast, and the prefecture gets its containment, and everyone goes home." A pause. "It is the only path I can offer that does not end in either a vent or a body, overseer. But I will tell you now, so it is on the log, the clerk will not like it. They never like it when you dart the thing they have made tame. But her liking it is not the metric. 9 lives is the metric. I am citing the rig." Ren did not like it. Ashek watched her take the news over the channel, Osk's flat professional voice explaining the sedation rig, the clean line, the soft put-down. And he watched something go still in her face that was worse than anger, a kind of tired dread, and he understood before she said a word, that the supply officer had already run this exact scenario in her head weeks ago, and knew something about it that the warden did not. "Don't dart it," Ren said. "Officer," Osk said, "I understand the attachment." "It's not attachment, warden, it's arithmetic. You like arithmetic, do some." Her voice stayed level, but it had edges on it now. "You're going to fire a heavy dart into a Class 12 apex from a deathworld. What do you think happens in the 4 or 5 seconds between the dart hitting and the sedative taking? On a farm animal, nothing. It stands there and gets sleepy. On this," she put her hand flat on the great bandaged shoulder beside her, "this is an ambush predator that has survived 6 weeks in a strange dark warren by staying calm and reading everything that moves. You put a needle in it out of a wall, it doesn't get sleepy. It gets ambushed asterisk. And for 4 or 5 seconds before your chemistry catches up, you have exactly the animal you've all been afraid of this whole time. A Class 12 apex that has just learned this place hurts it. And it is going to move, warden. And it is going to move fast. And it is going to be 4 meters from 9 of your people when it does. You want to know why your beast wouldn't track it? Because your beast is smart enough to know you don't corner an apex. You dart this, you corner it. You'll be doing the one thing every instinct in your own animal was screaming at you not to do." There was a silence on the channel. "The dose acts in under 6 seconds, Osk said, but there was less certainty in it now. "Under 6 seconds is 6 seconds of a frightened apex in a room full of people," Ren said. "I've spent 6 weeks making sure it is never, ever frightened around me. Because I understood in the first week that the only safe version of this animal is the calm one. And the calm one is a thing I built by hand over 6 weeks of never once giving it a reason to stop trusting the deck it stands on. You put 1 dart in it and you break 6 weeks in 1 second and you don't get it back, warden. You don't get to rebuild trust with a sedated animal in a cradle. You'll have a monster in a box that used to be tame, and it'll be your fault and it'll be forever. A breath. There is a better way to move it, and you already watched it work. It let 2 crews walk past it. It let your beast keen at it and didn't get up. It does what I ask because I've earned that, and I can walk it out of here on its feet, awake, calm, past every one of these people if you will all just stop pointing things at it. The dart is the dangerous option. I'm the safe one. I know that's backwards to you. It's backwards to everybody up there. It's still true." Ashek believed her. That was the thing he kept coming back to afterward, crouched 10 meters from a Class 12 apex predator in the red dark, with his stun lance across his knees and his 2 volunteers breathing hard behind him and 8 rescued strangers at his flank. He believed the small, tired human completely, and he keyed his own channel and did the second thing that hour that could have ended his career. "Command, this is Corporal Ashek, security below the line." His mouth was dry. "I want it logged that I have been within 10 meters of this animal for the better part of 40 minutes. It has looked at me. It has looked at all of us. It knows exactly how many of us are down here and where we are, and it has done nothing, and I have watched it lean into that officer's hand like he didn't have the word. He was Sarek. They didn't keep animals. He did not have the word for what he had watched. Sir, I've got 2 work crews down here who are alive because that animal chose to walk around them. I don't know what it is, but I know what it isn't. It isn't hunting. And I think the officer's right that the dart makes it start." It was while that hung on the channel, while Dune weighed a warden against a clerk against a corporal against a liaison he'd already switched off, that the low bays reminded everyone that an apex predator was not, in fact, the most dangerous thing in a wounded station. The support column biscuit had struck in the first minutes, the one the security channel had noted and moved past, had been carrying more than the security channel knew. It had been carrying the corner load of a 4-high rack of water ice pallets in the sub-bay 1 deck down, and for 2 hours the column had held its buckle in the patient way that damaged structure holds, right up until the low bay vent prep began cycling the atmosphere reclaim, and the pressure differentials shifted across the old compartments, and then the column let go, and 40 tons of water ice racking came down into the sub-bay with a sound like the station breaking a bone. "Structural collapse, sub-bay 19 lower," the tier called, and then, a moment later, worse. "We have a personnel trace under it. 1 trace, faint. It's overseer, it's the loader, Anu, the prail. He went back down for the last of the shelter count and the deck came down on him. He's alive. He's pinned." And the collapse dropped an emergency bulkhead across the only route in. The security team's on the wrong side of it. They can't reach him. And the sub-bay's losing pressure through the breach. Slow, but it's losing. Ashek was already moving. He got to the dropped bulkhead in 40 seconds and it was full down and locked, a solid gray slab, and on the far side of it on the intercom, Anu the loader. Anu who had not run, who had stayed to pull people out of the aisle, who was braver than the whole security branch, said in a small pressed voice that he could not move his legs, that the deck was cold, that his ears hurt, which meant the pressure, which meant a clock much shorter than anyone wanted. And Ashek put both hands flat on the bulkhead and pushed against a slab of metal that 4 of him could not have moved, and understood that he was going to stand here and listen to a good person die on the other side of a door. And there was nothing in his authority or his weapon or his training that could open it. "The bulkhead's structural now, the collapse deformed the track. We can't cycle it," the tier was saying. "We'd have to cut it, that's 20 minutes minimum, and the sub-bay's got maybe, overseer, the sub-bay's got maybe 8. And Ashek, with his hands flat on the door, heard behind him in the red dark a sound he had been listening for and dreading for 2 hours. The sound of the great banded animal getting to its feet, and he turned, and Biscuit was up and moving, and coming toward him and the door and the trapped man behind it, and the small human was walking at its shoulder with 1 hand resting on it, and Ren Ostrander said, in the flat, dry farmer's voice with no drama in it anywhere, "Move, Corporal. Not far. Just move. He's going to want to see the problem." What happened next took 4 minutes, and Ashek spent the rest of his career unable to describe it to anyone's satisfaction, because the people who had not been there always wanted it to be more dramatic than it was, and the truth was that it was not dramatic at all. It was competent. That was the terrible, wonderful thing about it. It was the most competent 4 minutes Ashek had ever witnessed, and none of it was his. The animal did not touch the locked bulkhead. It went to it, put its blunt head against the cold metal, and stood there a moment with its banded flanks working, and Ashek understood later that it was listening for the man, for the air, for the shape of the space on the far side that it could not see. Then it turned away from the door entirely, which made no sense to Ashek and perfect sense to the animal, and it went to the low, dark corner of the bay where a maintenance grill sat flush in the deck plating, a crawl access that was on no shelter map, and that the animal had plainly known about for 6 weeks, and it put one broad forelimb against the grill and pushed, and the grill that was rated for the weight of a Sarek Tech folded back like foil. "It knows the warren," Wren said quietly to no one walking at its shoulder. "It's lived down here 6 weeks. It knows every hole in this place better than your maps do. Anu's not behind the door. He's under the racking, and the racking backs onto the crawl. It's not going through the door. It's going around." It went down into the crawl, and it should not have fit, and it fit the way water fits, folding its whole terrible bulk down into a space that Ashek would have hesitated to send Ilse into, and it was gone into the dark under the deck. And for 90 seconds there was nothing on the intercom but the sound of Anu's careful, frightened breathing, and under it, deeper, the patient scrape and shift of something very large moving very carefully through a space too small for it. Then Anu's voice, cracked open with terror and something worse than terror, which was hope. "It's here. Oh, it's under the racking with me. Its face is right." "Hold still," Wren said into the intercom, flat and level and total. "Anu, listen to me. Hold absolutely still and let it work. It is not going to hurt you. It has never hurt anybody. It came down here to get you out, and it needs you to not fight it. Whatever it does, you let it. Do you understand? You let it." And Anu, pinned under 40 tons of collapsed racking in a depressurizing sub-bay with the apex predator of a deathworld pressed against him in the dark, held still and let it. And afterward he told the story the same way every time, in the same words, because they were the only words he had for it. "It lifted the deck off me," Anu would say. "That's all. There's no people want there to be more. There isn't more. There was a mountain of racking on my legs, and I was going to die under it, and then it got its shoulders under the low end of the mountain, and it lifted, slow, so slow, not a heave, nothing violent, just up and up, a hand's width too, holding the whole weight on its back like it was nothing, like it was patient, and it looked at me the whole time with one eye the size of my head, and it did not let the weight slip once, not once. And it held the mountain up off my legs and looked at me, and I understood that it was waiting. It was waiting for me to crawl out, so I crawled out. And when I was clear, it set the mountain back down as gentle as you'd set down a sleeping child, and it turned around in that little dark space, careful, so careful, and it put its nose against my face for 1 second, and then it took the back of my collar in its teeth. I felt the teeth. I felt every one of them. It could have closed that mouth and taken my head, and it took my collar instead. And it pulled me back through the crawl into the bay, and it set me down at that girl's feet, and it sat down and it looked at her. Anu always stopped there for a moment, whatever the audience. It looked at her like it wanted her to know it had done the thing right, like I don't have the animal for it. We don't keep animals, like it wanted her to be pleased with it. That's the closest I can come. A creature that could have ended this station wanted a supply clerk to be pleased with it. That's what came off Annette. That's what she'd made. Corporal Ashek carried Anu the last stretch to the service ladder himself, and the loader was pale and shaking and pressure-bruised and entirely, impossibly alive. And behind them, the animal walked at the small human's shoulder with the loose ease of a thing that had done a day's work. And Ashek keyed his channel with a hand he could not keep steady, and said the thing that broke the last of the tears' certainty. "Command Ashek below the line. The loader Anu is recovered, alive, breaking pressure, but alive, moving to the ladder now." He swallowed. "For the log, the recovery was made by the animal. Not by my team, not by any equipment. The animal went through a maintenance crawl that no rescue asset could have reached in the time we had. It lifted 40 tons of collapsed racking off a pinned man on its own back, held it, waited for him to clear, set it down without a slip, and carried him out in its teeth without leaving a mark on him. I watched it do this. 8 civilian witnesses watched it do this. It did this 4 minutes after the warden proposed darting it. A breath. Sir, I have been a security corporal for 6 years, and I have never in my life put my name behind an animal, and I am putting my name behind this one. Whatever the prefecture says it is, what I watched it do was go back for a man his own station had given up on. If we vent this section, or dart this animal, we are killing the single best thing that has happened on this station in the 11 years I have served on it. And I want that on the log with my name and my number attached, so that whoever files this knows a security officer stood here and said it out loud. The channel was silent for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, it was Warden Osk who spoke, and the sedation rig, which had been sighted and armed and lined up on a clean shot at the animal for the last several minutes, did not fire. "Stand down the rig," Osk said to his own crew, and there was something in the old Catholi's voice that Ashik had not heard from him before, a roughness, the sound of 30 years of certainty being set down carefully so it would not break. "Stand it down." "Log it," Warden Osk, declining the sedation option on his own authority over the objection of prefecture oversight. A pause. "I have spent 30 years teaching predators to obey me through the leash and the correction and the long, slow breaking of the will. And I have a bonded beast on my sled that would die for me because I made him need me. And I have just watched a supply clerk who owns no leash and knows no technique walk a Class 12 apex through a rescue on nothing but the animal's own trust in her. And I am not going to be the man who put a needle in that. I have never in my life bonded a beast that would go back for a stranger. Not once. It is not in the training. You cannot make a beast do that. A bonded beast does what you demand and no more. That animal was not made to obey. That animal chose. And a thing that chooses to go back for a man it does not know is not a threat the prefecture gets to vent because it is inconvenient. His breath came rough over the channel. "Overseer, I withdraw my recommendation to vent. I withdraw my recommendation to sedate. I recommend we bring it up alive, and I recommend the clerk walk it up, because she is the only living being aboard this station it will follow, and because, after what I have just watched, I would rather trust her than trust myself." In the glass tier, Overseer Dune sat with his hands unfolded now, because there was no longer any point in hiding that they shook, and he made the decision that a supply man makes when procedure has run out and only judgment is left. "We bring it up," he said. The tier looked at him. "We bring it up alive to the main transfer floor, and we do it properly, on the record, in the daylight, where every camera on this station can see it, because I am not going to have this depot's most important hour happen in the dark where the prefecture can edit it." He stood. "Clear the transfer floor of all non-essential personnel. Recall the security cordon to the floor and have them ready, full cordon. Weapons live. And if that animal does one wrong thing, they end it and I will carry that. But nobody fires unless it moves on a person. Nobody fires because it is large, or because it is loud, or because a liaison in an office is nervous. It has had 100 chances to be what we were afraid of, and it has not taken one of them, and it just went back into a collapse for a man it never met, and I will give it the courtesy of a cordon that watches before it kills." He looked at the great calm ghost of it on the muster board, walking up now toward the light with a small human at its shoulder. "Supply Second Ostrander. This is Dune. We are lifting the alert to standby and clearing the transfer floor. I am going to ask you to walk it up into the daylight past a live cordon, and I am not going to lie to you, officer. Those weapons will be up the whole way, and if it breaks toward my people, they will fire and I will not be able to stop them. I can hold the vent. I can hold the dart. I cannot hold 30 frightened security troops with their weapons up if a Class 12 comes off that ramp at a run. So I need you to be as sure as you have ever been about anything, because you are about to walk the most dangerous animal in the sector through the middle of the thing it fears most, which is a crowd of frightened people pointing weapons, and the only thing standing between it and 100 rifles is going to be you and a name you gave it. Are you sure, officer? Say it on the log. Are you sure? There was a pause, 3 decks down in the rising light, and then the small, dry human voice came up the channel one more time, tired and level and entirely without drama, the voice of a person stating a fact and leaving it in the air. I'm sure, Ren said. I've been sure for 6 weeks. You're all just catching up, a beat. Bring the lights up. Get your people to stand still and stop shouting. And whatever you do, whatever it does, whatever happens on that floor, nobody says its name but me. That's the one thing. It knows exactly one voice for that name, and it needs to stay exactly one voice. Everybody keep your mouths shut, and let me walk my animal home. The walk up out of the low bays was 400 meters and took 19 minutes, because Ren would not let it be rushed. And because a Class 12 apex predator does not hurry through territory it does not trust, and because she needed every one of those minutes to remember exactly who she was and exactly what she was doing, so that when they reached the light she would not have a single doubt left in her to leak down the leash she did not hold. She walked at its shoulder with one hand resting light on the banded muscle, not gripping, never gripping, and she talked to it the whole way in the low-level nothing voice she'd built over 6 weeks, and she did not once look back at the security corporal and his volunteers following 10 meters behind, or at the 2 work crews behind them, or at the cameras she knew were tracking every step, because looking back was for people who were not sure, and she had told the overseer the truth. She was sure. She had been sure since the 3rd week, but being sure was a thing you had to keep being minute by minute. And so as she walked she let herself remember, because remembering was how she stayed sure. She remembered the container. It had been a routine intake, week 6 of the shipping season, a run of soil casks off the Annette survey with one manifest discrepancy. A cask logged at intake mass but reading 40 kilos heavy, the kind of thing a supply officer chases down because chasing down discrepancies is the entire job. She had cracked the cask expecting settled water or a packing error, and instead there had been an eye. One eye in the dark at the back of the cask, the size of her fist, and around it a young animal folded into a space far too small for it, crushed and starved and bleeding from a flank wound where the cask wall had cut it in transit, and it had looked up at her, and she had looked down at it, and the induction card in her breast pocket had been very clear about what came next. She remembered standing there for a long time. She remembered thinking about the incinerator, which was 2 decks up and ran hot enough to render a survey specimen to ash in 90 seconds, and about the airlock, which was faster, and about the fact that this small crushed terrible thing had come 400,000 kilometers up a gravity, well folded in the dark and bleeding, and had not made a sound, was not making a sound now, was only looking at her with one enormous eye out of the wreck of itself. And she remembered the drainage ditch on Delacroix, and the storm-panicked mare and her grandfather going down in the dark with a bucket of warm mash. And she remembered that she had never once, in her whole life, met a thing so far down that kindness could not reach it, and she had decided, standing there with the induction card against her heart, that she was not going to start today. She remembered the first feeding. She had not touched it that first day. She had cleaned the visible edge of the flank wound with a long-handled swab because she was a supply officer and not a fool, and she had set down water and a torn-open protein pack within reach and stepped back to the cask mouth and sat on a crate and waited, and it had not eaten while she watched, because things at the bottom do not eat while you watch. So after an hour she had left, and come back the next shift, and the food was gone and the water was gone and the animal was still there. And its eyes came up to her the second she entered the bay, tracking her the whole way in, and that was the first day of the 6 weeks. She remembered that it took 9 days before it would eat with her in the bay, and 11 before it would take food from a distance of 2 meters, and 14 before the morning she came down, and it was not at the back of the cask but out of it, standing in the bay in the open when she arrived, having decided, on its own in the night, to be somewhere she could see all of it, which she understood even then was the single most trusting thing a prey-wary apex could do, to stand in the open and be seen. She remembered the wound closing clean under the salve she was absolutely not qualified to apply, and the animal putting on weight, and the animal getting larger every week, until the casket had arrived crushed inside of would not have held one of its legs, and she remembered the specific afternoon in the third week when it had first followed her. When she had finished the feeding, and turned to go and heard the deck plates take a weight behind her, and turned back and it was up, at her shoulder. Having decided to walk her to the bay door, and she had stood very still and it had stood very still, and then she had said, "All right," and turned and walked, and it had walked with her at her shoulder to the door and no further. Because past the door was the rest of the station, and it was not a fool either, and after that it walked her to the door every day. She remembered the naming, which she had told the whole command channel about in the flat version, the version that was true and left out everything that mattered. What she had left out was that she had cried, a little, the evening she caught it stealing crackers, not from fear and not from laughter, though it had been funny, the great terrible thing frozen mid-theft with a survival biscuit absurd in its mouth. She had cried because, in the instant she'd heard herself say the name, Biscuit, "You are unbelievable," she had understood that she had lost. That she had a name for it now, and a thing with a name is a thing you have decided to keep, and she could not keep it. There was no version of the universe in which a supply second class kept a Class 12 apex predator, and so naming it was just choosing the exact shape of the grief she was going to feel when this ended, which it would, badly, because everything about it was against every rule that existed. She had known all that, the evening of the naming. And she had named it anyway because it was already too late, had been too late since the container, since the eye in the dark, since she had failed to walk to the incinerator. You did not get to name a thing and then be reasonable about it. She was her grandfather's granddaughter. There was no reasonable in her about a frightened animal. There never had been. She remembered the closest call, week 5, when a maintenance sweep had come through the low bays 2 aisles from where the animal lay up, and she had walked out to meet the tech in the open aisle and stood talking to him about repeater tickets with her heart going like a hammer, knowing that a Class 12 apex was 30 meters away in the dark behind her, knowing that if it came out, if it got curious, if it got frightened, the tech was dead and she was finished and it was ash by nightfall, and it had not come out. It had stayed in the dark and been still for 40 minutes, while she talked repeaters with a maintenance tech because she was in the aisle and she was calm, and it had learned by then that when she was calm the world was safe, and it had trusted that against every prey-wary instinct it had. She had understood that day, week 5, exactly how deep the thing went. It was not tame the way a farm dog is tame. It was something rarer and heavier than that. It had decided that her calm was the truest fact in its world, truer than its own instincts, and it would hold still inside a killing instinct on the strength of her standing easy in an aisle. That was not a leash. Osk was right about that, though Osk did not know it yet. That was a choice, made new every day, by an animal that could have chosen otherwise every day and did not. She remembered the night she had almost lost her nerve. It had been the end of the 4th week, the same week she had named it, and she had lain awake in her bunk doing the arithmetic that any sane person would have done weeks earlier, the arithmetic of what she was risking, and the numbers had been very bad. She was a supply second class from a farm world with no rank behind her and no faction to speak for her, and she had concealed a live Class 12 import for a month, and the punishment for that was not a demotion but the end of everything. And the animal was getting larger every week, and there was no plan. There had never been a plan. There was only a widening gap between the day she had opened the container and the day the whole thing came down, and lying in the dark she had let herself think. For one long cold hour, about going to the incinerator crew in the morning and telling the truth and letting them end it while it was still small enough to end quietly, before it grew into the disaster she could see coming. It would have been the sensible thing. It would have been the safe thing. Every rule and every instinct agreed on it. She had gotten as far as the incinerator deck the next morning. She remembered standing outside the hatch with her hand not quite on the panel, rehearsing the sentence, and then she had thought about the way the animal had come out of the back of the cask in the third week to stand in the open when it heard her step, offering her the whole of itself, trusting her with the one thing a prey-wary apex never trusts anyone with, which was its own visibility. And she had understood that if she walked through that hatch, she would not just be ending an animal. She would be breaking the one promise it had ever believed, and that she would have to live inside a self that did that, afterward, forever. And she had taken her hand off the panel and gone down to the low bays instead and fed it, on schedule, same time, same voice, and never told anyone how close she had come. And after that morning she had stopped doing the arithmetic, because the arithmetic assumed there was a version of her that could break the promise, and there wasn't, and pretending there might be only made the nights harder. She remembered all of it in the 19 minutes of the walk-up, and by the time the ramp turned its last bend and the flat white daylight of the transfer dome began to spill down the incline to meet them, she was sure, all the way down, the way she had needed to be, and it was good that she was, because the animal balked. It balked at the edge of the light. It had lived 6 weeks in the deep dark of the low bays, a thing built by a lightless forest floor for a lightless forest floor, and the ramp ahead of it opened into 100 meters of shadowless noon under the great clear dome, the whole transfer floor lit hard and bright and open with the green-white bulk of Annette standing enormous in the glass beyond. And at the edge of that light, the animal stopped, and its banded shoulders came up out of their ease into the old readiness. And Wren felt the change run through the muscle under her hand like a current, and she stopped too at once with it, and did not pull. "I know," she said low. "I know it's bright, it's open. There's a lot of them up there, and they're scared of you, and being scared makes people loud, and you hate loud, and you hate open, and every part of you is telling you that a bright open place full of frightened things is exactly where a smart animal does not go." She kept her hand still on its shoulder. Behind her, 10 meters back, the security corporal had frozen. She could feel him not breathing. "You're right. It is. Everything down here has kept you alive by being right about that. But I need you to be wrong about it one more time, the way you were wrong about me in the container, the way you were wrong about the cruise, the way you were wrong to hold still in that aisle in week 5. I need you to walk into the bright, open, scary place because I'm going to walk into it with you. And I have never once walked you into anything that hurt you, not in 6 weeks, not one single time, and I'm not going to start now." She took one step up the ramp into the first spill of the daylight alone, her hand trailing off its shoulder, and stopped and stood in the light, easy, and did not look back, and waited, the way she had waited on a crate at the mouth of a cask for 9 days in the 3rd week of the shipping season. "Come on then," she said. "Come into the light. It's just me up here. It's only ever been me." And the most dangerous animal in the surveyed galaxy stood at the edge of the dark for a long 3 seconds, and then it walked up into the daylight to stand at the shoulder of a small, tired human, because she was there, and she was calm, and in 6 weeks she had never once been wrong about what was safe. Corporal Ashek came up out of the ramp behind them into the light of the transfer floor and saw the cordon, and understood, with the flat clarity that comes at the worst moments, that it was going to go wrong. The transfer floor had been cleared, but a cleared floor is not an empty floor, and the security cordon Dune had recalled stood in a wide, ragged arc across the open deck, 30-some troops with their weapons up and their nerves down to the wire, because they had spent 2 hours listening to a Class 12 containment event on their channels, and being told the worst animal in the sector was loose beneath their feet. And now here it came, up the ramp into the daylight, huge and banded and scarred. Exactly the monster they had braced for, and it did not matter one bit that a supply clerk walked at its shoulder, and a security corporal vouched for it on the log. What the troops saw was the monster. What their hands knew was the weapon. And behind them, on the raised walkway, stood the prefecture liaison serval, cool and clipped and furious at having been switched off, and Ashek saw Serval's mouth moving on a private channel to the cordon officers, and he did not need to hear it to know its shape. "Stand easy," Wren said to the whole floor, not raising her voice, and the not raising was somehow louder than a shout. "Everybody stand easy. Weapons down or weapons up, I can't make you, but I'm telling you the truth. The thing that gets somebody hurt in this room is not the animal, it's you. It's 30 of you with your hands shaking on your triggers, and it can smell every one of you, and it can smell exactly how scared you are. So if you want to keep this room safe, the single most useful thing you can do is be boring. Be still, be quiet. Let me walk it across to the containment cradle, and this is over." And it might have worked. It was working. She had it moving again at her shoulder, out across the open floor toward the transport cradle on the far side, and the troops were holding, ragged and terrified but holding, and Ashek let himself begin to believe, for about 9 seconds, that the small human was going to walk the monster across the daylight and end the worst day in the station's history without a shot. Then a young trooper on the near arc of the cordon, a Sarek cadet, no older than Ashek had been at his first posting, who had listened to 2 hours of a containment channel and was now looking at the actual animal from 20 meters, lost his nerve in the specific way that nerves are lost, not in a scream but in a small involuntary flinch, a half step back, and the barrel of his stun lance came up, and the capacitor in it gave the thin rising whine of a charge cycling to full. And on the open silent floor that whine was enormous. The animal heard it. Ashek watched it happen and could do nothing. The whine of the charging weapon was, to a thing that had survived 6 weeks in a warren by reading every sound, the sound of a threat committing, and its whole body changed in an instant, the ease gone, the scars standing out along the bandaged shoulders as the muscle came up hard, and it wheeled not toward the trooper. Ashek would say afterward, not an attack, never an attack. It wheeled away from the whining weapon the way any animal wheels from a thing that has just told it that it is about to be hurt. And wheeling away from the near arc of the cordon carried it around and toward the far arc, toward the containment cradle and the troops standing between it and the cradle. A Class 12 apex predator coming off its haunches and turning fast in a room full of frightened people with weapons, and every weapon on the floor came up at once, 30 barrels rising, 30 capacitors whining, Serval's voice cracking across the cordon channel saying *fire, fire, fire it, and the whole room folded down into the single frozen quarter-second before the massacre that everyone in it would have sworn was already inevitable. "Biscuit!" She did not shout it. That was the thing Ashek could never make anyone understand. In a room where a liaison was screaming *fire and 30 capacitors were screaming toward full, and the most dangerous animal in the sector was coming off its haunches, the small human did not shout. She said the name the way she had said it for 6 weeks in the dark of a cargo bay, level and dry and certain, the way you say a thing you have said 1,000 times to an animal that has never once failed to hear it. One flat 2-syllable word dropped into the middle of the worst noise the room had ever made. "Biscuit down." And the animal stopped. It stopped mid-motion, mid-wheel, all that terrible gathered muscle arrested in a single instant as though the name had reached into the oldest part of it and simply switched off the fear. And for one heartbeat it stood frozen in the daylight with the whole room's weapons on it. And then it turned its great scarred head away from the cordon, away from the whining weapons and the screaming liaison and the 30 rifles, and it looked for her, found her, and it went to her. Not fast, not slow. It crossed the 6 meters between them at an unhurried walk, through a room that had just been ordered to kill it, past barrels that tracked it every step, and it came to the small human, and it lowered its banded bulk down onto the bright floor at her feet, folding its legs under it, laying its heavy scarred head down across the toe of her boot, and it let out a long breath through its nose, and it closed its enormous eyes. It lay down at her feet in the daylight, in the middle of a live cordon, and it went still, and the stillness was the most complete thing Ashek had ever witnessed, because it was not the stillness of an animal cornered. It was the stillness of an animal that had come home. Everything in the room had been braced for the snap, for the lunge, for the red ruin the induction card had promised for 11 years. And instead there was a supply clerk standing easy in the noon light with her hand come to rest on the head of a sleeping apex, and 30 weapons pointed at an animal that was, unmistakably, taking a nap. "There," Wren said into the enormous silence, and Ashik heard the smallest crack of tiredness in it, the only crack she let anyone see all day. That's all it was. That's all it ever was. She looked up past the animal, at the cordon, at the raised walkway, at the liaison serval standing with his ordered word dead in his mouth. "You can put the weapons down now. He's not going to do anything. He's had a very long day, and he pulled a man out of a collapse, and he walked into the light because I asked him to, and now he's going to sleep, because that's what a good boy does when the work is done. A beat, dry as old wood. You woke a whole station and armed a war corps and put your hands on a vent switch and screamed *fire across a floor, all of you, for 6 weeks of a scared young animal that just wanted somebody to feed it and not lie to it. And the whole time, the entire time, his name was Biscuit, and he came when he was called. Nobody fired. That was the thing that mattered in the end, and it came down to one man. The liaison serval had given the order to fire, and it had gone out on the cordon channel, and by every line of coalition doctrine the cordon should have fired, and the reason they did not was Overseer Doon, who had heard serval's fire on the command relay and had, in the same quarter-second, keyed the master cordon override he was not supposed to use except in event of a compromised chain of command, and had said, into 30 pairs of ears, in the flat, unhurried voice of a supply man who has finally found the one thing in 40 years he is willing to end his career on, belay that, weapons down, nobody fires on my floor. That is a direct order from the station commander, and it supersedes the prefecture liaison, and I will carry every consequence of it. And if any one of you fires on that animal now, after what it just did, you will answer to me and not to him." And the cordon, which had been one twitch from slaughter, lowered its weapons, 30 barrels sinking toward the deck one after another in a long, ragged ripple. Because in the end, a security trooper obeys the officer whose face he knows over the liaison whose face he does not. And Doon's face they knew, and Doon had said down, so they put it down. Ashik stood at the mouth of the ramp with his own stun lance hanging forgotten in his hand, and watched the weapons come down all across the bright floor, and watched the small human stand easy in the noon light with an apex predator asleep across her boots, and he felt something he had no Sarek word for, and would spend years reaching for and never quite catch, which was the particular awe of a person who has watched the entire architecture of what he believed to be true, about strength, about danger, about what wins a room and what loses it, be quietly, completely, and permanently rearranged by someone who never once raised her voice. He looked at the liaison on the walkway, at serval standing rigid and pale with his authority lying dead on the floor in front of the whole station, and Ashik found, to his mild surprise, that he had a security corporal's report already writing itself in his head, and that it was going to be a very truthful report, and that a great many people were not going to like it. Then the animal on the floor snored a deep, ridiculous, rumbling snore, the snore of something the size of a draft beast with its head on a boot, and somewhere in the shocked silence of the transfer floor, one of the rescued loaders from Crew 19 began, helplessly, to laugh, and it spread, the way relief spreads through people who have just not died, and Ashik discovered that he was laughing too, standing in the daylight with his forgotten weapon, laughing at a sleeping monster. While the worst day in the history of Caravantes ended not with a shot but with a snore. The prefecture liaison came down off the walkway while the animal was still snoring, and Overseer Doon met him at the edge of the cordon, and the two of them had, in front of a floor full of witnesses and a station full of cameras, the conversation that decided everything. "You have destroyed your career, Overseer," serval said. He said it quietly, precisely, the way the Antu said everything, and there was no heat in it which made it worse. You countermanded a prefecture instruction on an open channel. You overrode a firing order in a confirmed Class 12 event. You are protecting a self-confessed induction criminal and a live surface apex on a civilian depot, and you have done all of it on log, where I cannot make it go away and neither can you. When the prefecture reviews this, they will not see a commander who saved 9 lives. They will see a commander who lost control of his station and then refused every lawful instrument offered to help him regain it. You will be relieved. The animal will be destroyed under proper conditions. The clerk will be remanded, and the only thing your defiance will have bought is that it happened a day later than it should have. Maybe, Dune said. He was tired. He had been overseer of caravanties for 11 years and a supply man for 40, and he found, standing in the noon light at the edge of the cordon, that he did not have it in him to be afraid of the prefecture anymore, because he had spent the afternoon being afraid of much larger things, and had come out the other side of the fear into a flat, clear place where only the truth was left. Maybe they relieve me, Dune said. I've had a good run. But I want you to look at something before you finish writing my epitaph, liaison, because you keep saying asterisk the animal and the clerk and the induction criminal asterisk, and you weren't down there, and I was watching the boards, and I'm going to tell you what I watched. He turned and pointed, across the bright floor, at the small human standing easy with the apex asleep across her boots. I watched that animal have 9 separate opportunities to kill people in the last 3 hours and decline every one of them. I watched it walk around a work crew huddled in a cage. I watched it go down into a collapse through a hole no rescue asset could reach and lift 40 tons off a pinned loader and carry him out in its teeth without breaking his skin. I watched it walk into an open room full of frightened people pointing weapons at it because she asked it to. And I watched it, one twitch from being torn apart by my own cordon, stop dead on a single word from a supply clerk and go and lie down at her feet and fall asleep. He lowered his hand. You want to destroy that, under proper conditions, and prosecute the person who made it, and you think the tragedy of today is that I made you do it a day late. He looked at the liaison, and there was something almost gentle in it, the gentleness of a man who has stopped arguing because he has understood that he is right. Liaison, we have spent 11 years and a plaque full of dead survey teams learning that nothing off Anet can be lived with. And this afternoon, a supply second class stood on my floor and disproved 11 years of doctrine with a bucket of protein biscuits and the simple refusal to be afraid. And she did it on camera, in daylight, in front of the whole station, and you want to know the truth. The prefecture is not going to destroy that animal. The prefecture is going to want to know how she did it. Because the first faction in this galaxy that learns to walk Class 12 apexes on a single word does not have a containment problem, liaison. It has an army, and your masters did not get where they are by burning armies to spare themselves an afternoon's embarrassment. Serval was quiet for a long moment. You are gambling your career on the cynicism of the prefecture, he said at last. I am gambling my career on 40 years of watching how power actually decides things, Dune said. It's the safest bet I've made all day. Warden Osk did not go home that night. He stayed aboard caravanties for 11 days, and in those 11 days he did a thing that no Cathali of his rank had done in living memory, which was to write a report that admitted he had been comprehensively, professionally, and instructively wrong. He wrote it carefully, in the dense forensic style of the Beast Corps, and it was the most important document produced in the whole affair, more important than Dune's incident log or Ashek's witness report or the prefecture's furious internal traffic, because Osk was the one being in the sector whose judgment on a predator no one could dismiss. When a supply clerk said the animal was tame, that was an amateur's affection. When a security corporal vouched for it, that was a shaken young officer's sentiment. But when Warden Osk of the Cathali Beast Corps, 30 years decorated, keeper of bonded war beasts on 40 worlds, wrote in an official finding that what he had witnessed aboard caravanties was not a containment failure, but the single most complete predator bond he had encountered in his career, and that the human method that produced it warranted not prosecution but study, that could not be waved away. He came to find Wren on the fourth day, in the requisition office where she had gone back to work, because there was nothing else for her to do, and because the animal slept better when she kept her routine, and he stood in the doorway of the little office for a while watching the apex predator of Annette doze in a patch of dome light on the office floor with its chin on the supply clerk's boot, while she worked through a backlog of intake discrepancies with a stylus. And he said, finally, "May I ask you something, officer?" "Not for the report, for me." "You can ask," Wren said, not looking up. "I have bonded 19 beasts in my life." Osk came into the office and lowered his bulk carefully into the visitor's chair, and the animal opened one enormous eye, considered him, decided he was permitted, and closed it again. 19. Every one of them through the core method, the leash, the correction, the controlled deprivation, the long breaking of the will until the beast understands that I am the source of everything it needs and cannot survive without me. It is a good method. It makes reliable beasts, and every one of my 19 beasts, if I fell in front of it wounded, would guard my body until it starved, because I made it need me that much. He was quiet a moment. None of them would go back for a stranger. It is not in them. I did not build it in them. I built the opposite. I built need, and need does not share. And I have spent 4 days trying to understand how a supply clerk with no method and no leash built the one thing 30 years of my craft cannot build, and I cannot understand it, and it is keeping me awake, and I am too old to lose sleep over a thing I do not understand, so I am asking you plainly. How did you make it go back for the loader? What is the technique? Wren set down her stylus. "There isn't a technique, Warden," she said. "That's the part you're never going to be able to put in your report, and it's the part that's true. I didn't make him go back for Anu. I couldn't make him do anything. That's the whole difference between what you do and what I did." She looked at the sleeping animal, and her flat voice went, for a moment, very slightly less flat. "You make a beast need you. I just kept my word to it. Every day for 6 weeks I told it, with my hands and my voice and the same time on the same clock, that it was safe with me and that I would not hurt it and that the world was all right when I was standing in it. And I never once broke that. Not once. And a thing you never lie to, ever, for long enough, it doesn't come to need you. It comes to trust you. And a thing that trusts you completely isn't looking for what it needs anymore, because it already has it. So it's got room left over too," she shrugged. "A small human motion Osk did not have to be good. To go back for a stranger, because it's not afraid, and a thing that isn't afraid can afford to be kind. That's it. That's the whole secret your core has been missing for however many 100 years. You've been breaking them until they need you. We just stop lying to them until they trust us. You get a weapon that guards your corpse. We get an animal that goes back into a collapse for somebody it never met." She picked the stylus back up. "You can't put that in a report, Warden, because it isn't a technique. It's just being the kind of person a frightened thing can afford to believe. And that's not something you train. That's something you either are or you aren't." Osk sat with that for a long time. "On my world," he said at last slowly, "we have a saying about your species that I have heard my whole life and never once believed. It is meant as a warning. It says, 'The humans are dangerous because they make friends of monsters.'" He looked at the sleeping apex and at the small tired woman working her discrepancies beside it. "I always thought it meant they are reckless, that they befriend dangerous things out of foolishness and it gets them killed." He rose carefully from the chair. "I understand now that I had it backward. It is not a warning about their foolishness. It is a warning about their strength. You do not make friends of monsters because you are reckless, officer. You make friends of monsters because on your terrible little worlds you learned, a long time before the rest of us, that a monster is only a frightened thing that no one was ever kind to, and that if you are the one who is kind to it, it stops being a monster and starts being yours." He inclined his plated head to her, a gesture of respect no Kathali warden gave a supply clerk. "The coalition should be very glad you are on our side of the line. And they should be very, very careful never to end up on the other one." The prefecture review came 31 days after the alert, and it went almost exactly the way Overseer Dune had bet his career it would, which is to say cynically, and in the depot's favor, and for none of the reasons that ought to have mattered. Ashek attended it because he was a witness of record, and because his own report was one of the documents under review, and he sat in the depot's largest conference tier through 2 days of it, and came away with a permanent and useful education in how large institutions actually decide things. He had gone in expecting justice, either the good kind or the bad kind. What he got instead was arithmetic, the same cold least bad option arithmetic Dune ran a station on, only scaled up to the level of a galactic power, and the arithmetic went like this. The unedited log existed. That was the hinge of everything, and Dune had made sure of it on purpose, in the worst hour, when he ordered the animal brought up into the daylight where every camera on the station could see it. There was footage, thousands of hours of it from 100 angles, of a supply clerk walking a Class 12 Apex through a live cordon on a single word, of the animal lifting a collapse off a pinned loader, of it lying down at her feet and falling asleep while 30 weapons tracked it. That footage could not be unmade. It had already, in the 31 days, leaked across the Coalition's internal channels and out past them, because footage like that always leaks, and by the time the review convened, the entire surveyed galaxy had seen a small human make a friend of the worst monster the Coalition had a name for. And so the prefecture faced a choice, and it was not a moral choice, because the prefecture did not make moral choices, it made arithmetic ones. It could prosecute Supply Second Ostrander for the induction breach, which was a real breach, a capital breach, a breach of the one rule the whole depot existed to enforce, and destroy the animal under proper conditions and be entirely, unimpeachably within its own law. Or it could look at the footage that the whole galaxy had already seen, and ask itself what it would look like for the Coalition to execute the animal that saved the loader and prosecute the woman who walked it through the cordon, and what it would cost, in the one currency the prefecture actually spent, which was not credits, and was not law, but was the willingness of 100 client species to believe that the Coalition was the strong horse to back. They can't hang her, Dune said to Ashek quietly on the first evening of the review in the corridor outside the tier. That's the whole thing, Corporal, and it's not because she's innocent, she's not. She broke the founding rule of my station, and she'd tell you so herself. They can't hang her because everyone's watching, and because OSC's report says the thing she did is a capability and not a crime, and a power the size of the Coalition does not execute a new capability to punish a rule breaking, not when 19 client species just watch the capability carry a man out of a collapse. They're not going to do the just thing or the unjust thing. They're going to do the useful thing. Watch. They did the useful thing. The finding, when it came down on the second afternoon, was a masterpiece of an institution getting exactly what it wanted while appearing to compromise. Supply Second Ostrander was found to have committed a grave induction violation. She was formally censured for it. The censure entered in her record, and then, in the same document in the next paragraph, without any apparent sense of contradiction, she was found to have demonstrated a novel and strategically significant capability in Apex auxiliary integration, relieved of her supply duties, and reassigned, effective immediately, to a newly created posting that had not existed anywhere in the Coalition 31 days earlier. Auxiliary Liaison, First Class, reporting jointly to the Beast Corps and to a directorate whose name Ashek did not recognize and later learned, was the one that handled things the Coalition wanted very badly and did not want to talk about. Wren had listened to the finding read out in the tier with the same flat, unbothered expression she wore to inventory disputes, and when it was done, and the review chair asked her, formally, whether she accepted the reassignment, she had been quiet for a moment, and Ashek, watching her, had understood that this was the real cost, the one the arithmetic had extracted, and that she understood it too. "So I don't go to prison," Wren said slowly, "and Biscuit doesn't get destroyed, and the price is that I stop being a supply clerk that nobody looks at, and I become, what did you call it? A capability." She looked at the sleeping animal beside her chair, and then back at the chair of the review. "You understand that the only reason it worked is that nobody was looking at me. That I did it quiet, alone, on a deck nobody cared about, because I wasn't trying to build a asterisk capability. I was trying to keep a scared animal from getting burned. The second you make it a program, the second you put me in a directorate and give me a rank and a mandate and a caseload of monsters to make friends of on a schedule," she trailed off, and for the first time all day something like weariness showed through the flat. "You're going to try to turn the thing I did into a technique, and I already told the warden. It isn't a technique. It's just keeping your word to something frightened, every day, forever, and not lying to it ever. You can't put 30 of those on a duty roster. The minute it's a job, it stops being the thing that works." "Nevertheless," said the review chair, who had a directorate to feed, "do you accept the reassignment, officer?" Wren looked at Biscuit, asleep in the dome light with its scarred chin on her boot, 31 days out from the incinerator it had been minutes from, alive because she had broken the one rule that mattered and been right too. "I accept," she said, "as long as he stays with me. That's the only clause I want. Wherever you send me, whatever monster you point me at, he comes and he's mine and he's on the rolls with a name, not a catalog number. I named him. I'm not handing him to a directorate as an asset. He's on the manifest as Biscuit or I walk, censure or no censure, and you can explain to 19 client species why the human who makes friends of monsters resigned over a name. A dry beat. I've read your regulations, Chair. I've read all of them. That's the job. There's no regulation that says an auxiliary can't have a name. I checked. There was not, in fact, any such regulation, and the directorate wanted the capability far too much to invent one over a name, and so it was entered into the permanent rolls of the Coalition Auxiliary Service, in the dense official language of an institution that had no idea what it was actually writing down. Auxiliary, Apex Class, Anit Native, Designation Biscuit, bonded to Auxiliary Liaison W. Ostrander, Provision and Trust, to be maintained per attached protocol. The attached protocol was the funniest document Ashek ever read, and he did not think it was meant to be funny, which was what made it perfect. The Beast Corps had spent the 31 days doing what the Beast Corps did, which was to take a thing that worked and try to turn it into a doctrine. And because they were thorough and humorless and very good at their jobs, they had produced a 40-page standing order, dense with forensic language and cross-referenced against 600 years of predator-handling literature, formalizing the method by which the Ostrander bond had been achieved and was to be maintained. It had a title, in full, that ran to 2 lines of official coalition script and translated, roughly, to Standing Order concerning the establishment and perpetual maintenance of Apex Auxiliary Trust through invariant provision and the absolute non-violation of expectation. The humans on the station, all 6 of them, read it and looked at each other and started calling it Feeding the Dog. And that was the name that stuck, even in the official channels, even among the Sarek and the Prael and the Cathali, until eventually the Beast Corps itself gave up and retitled the Standing Order, in a small mortified amendment, Standing Order 7. Feeding the Dog, which is the title it bears to this day, and which is taught to every new auxiliary handler in the coalition, and which opens, past all the forensic apparatus, with 3 lines that Ashek eventually committed to memory because they were the truest 3 lines the whole affair produced, and because a supply clerk had said them first, in an office, to a warden, with an apex asleep on her boot. Provide at the same time, speak in the same voice, never once break your word. The bond is not built in the grand moment. It is built in the 1,000 small moments where you could have lied to it and did not. There was a 4th line, in the human annex to the Standing Order, which the Beast Corps had reluctantly appended because the human liaison insisted, and which was not forensic at all, and which the Cathali instructors always read aloud at the end with a particular flat delivery, as though daring the recruits to laugh, though none of them ever did. It said, "A monster is a frightened thing that no one was ever kind to. If you would rather have friends than weapons, be the one who is kind to it. Be the one and mean it and keep meaning it, and one day it will go back into the fire for a stranger, and you will understand what you have made, and it will be the best thing you ever did." The liaison serval was quietly recalled a few weeks after the finding, not disgraced exactly, because the prefecture did not disgrace its own, but reassigned to a posting far enough from the frontier that no one would ever ask him to explain, on a logged channel, why he had screamed asterisk fire across a floor at an animal that turned out to be carrying a rescued loader in its heart. Ashek never saw him again. He thought about him, sometimes without much rancor, because Serval had only been doing the thing his whole institution had trained him to do, which was to reach for the closed door and the clean vent the instant the world produced something it had no category for. And the lesson of the whole affair, the one the coalition never quite managed to write down, was that a species which meets every uncategorized thing with fire will one day burn the best thing it was ever offered and call it procedure. The induction card got rewritten that year. It no longer said that nothing off Anet could be lived with. It said, in careful new language that the humans on the station had quietly helped draft, that a live import was to be contained and assessed before disposal, and that assessment was to include the possibility, however remote, that the frightened thing in the container was not a disaster but an opportunity, and that the officer who found it should send, before anything else, for someone who knew how to sit in a ditch. Warden Osk left Caervantes on the 12th day, and before he left, he did one more thing that no one had asked him to do, and that Ashek only understood the meaning of much later. He brought his bonded war beast Grail down to the transfer floor, where Biscuit lay in its patch of dome light near the requisition office, and he took Grail off the leash, the core leash, the correction leash, the instrument of 9 years of bonding, and he let the war beast walk free on the open floor for the first time in its life, and Grail, released, did not run and did not hunt and did not return to Osk's heel. Grail walked, slow and low and wary, across the bright floor to where the apex of Anet lay dozing, and it stopped a respectful distance off, and it lowered its broad slate head, and then it lay down, some meters from Biscuit in the same patch of light, facing the same direction, in the unmistakable posture of a lesser predator taking its place in the presence of a greater one. Osk watched his beast lie down at the edge of another animal's piece, and something moved in the old Cathali's face that Ashek did not have the species knowledge to read, but that he thought, on reflection, might have been the particular grief of a man who has just seen. In the free choice of the creature he spent 9 years binding, everything he might have had instead if he had known, a long time ago, that there was another way. "Keep the leash," Osk said to no one, coiling the instrument of his craft slowly in his plated hands. "I think I am done with it," and he set it down on the bright floor and left it there and went home. Caervantes went back to work, because a depot always goes back to work, but it did not go back to being the same depot, and the changes were the small permanent kind that a station keeps long after the incident that caused them has become a story people tell newcomers. The low bays got their repeaters fixed. That was the first thing, and Ashek always thought it was the most honest measure of what the station had learned, because for 11 years the low bay repeaters had been a ticket nobody fixed, one of 1,000 small unfixed things in a depot that told itself it was well kept, and it had taken a Class 12 alert and 9 people nearly dead in the dark to teach Caervantes that a depot is not the sum of its doctrine but the sum of its unfixed tickets, and that the worst hour always comes up through the smallest thing everybody agreed to ignore. Overseer Dune had that lesson mounted on the wall of his tier, eventually, where the old plaque about a depot at rest had hung. The new one said, in plain Braille script, the disaster comes up through the ticket you did not fix. He was not relieved in the end. The useful outcome that spared the animal and the clerk spared him too, because an institution that has decided to celebrate a thing cannot very well relieve the commander who protected it. And so Dune kept his depot and ran it for another 6 years, and by every account ran it better, because a man who has been to his own worst hour and come out the far side with his people alive is a hard man to frighten with a rule afterward. Biscuit lived on the manifest. That was the strangest and best of the changes, and it never stopped being strange, and that was part of why it was good. There was, on the daily muster of Caravanti's supply depot, among the 12,000 souls and the intake schedules and the water ice tonnages, a single line that read *auxiliary, Apex class, designation biscuit, 1, and the line was real, and the animal it described spent its days exactly as an apex predator with nothing left to fear spends its days, which is to say asleep in whatever patch of the dome light was warmest, generally near the requisition office. Generally with its scarred chin on the boot or the door frame or the crate nearest to wherever the small human was working. The transfer floor learned to root around it. The stevedore crews learned that the sleeping mountain in the light was not to be woken but was, if you were quiet and it was awake and in the mood, not entirely opposed to having the flat plates behind its folded ears scratched, and there developed over the months a whole informal etiquette about the animal, an etiquette that no doctrine ever wrote down. You did not approach it fast, you did not approach it loud, you did not approach it at all unless the human nodded. And if she nodded, you approached the way you would approach any large, calm, dangerous thing that had decided to tolerate you, with respect and slowness, and your voice kept low. And in exchange for these courtesies, the most dangerous animal in the sector would, on a good day, roll one enormous shoulder toward you and sigh, and let you understand that you were, provisionally, welcome. The loader Anu came every shift. That was another thing that never changed. Anu, who had been pulled out of a collapse in the animal's teeth, brought it a protein biscuit every single shift for the rest of the time they served together, walking across the whole transfer floor to do it, setting the biscuit down flat on his broad pink palm, and holding it out the way he had watched the human do it. And the apex of Annette would open one eye, and consider the loader it had saved, and take the biscuit off his palm as gently as a horse takes an apple. And Anu would stand there a moment with his hand still out and his eyes bright, and then go back to work. He never made a thing of it. When newcomers asked him about it, he only said, "It went back for me," as though that explained everything, which to Anu it did. Corporal Ashek was promoted and reassigned, and the two things were connected in the way that consequences are connected in an institution that has decided to like an outcome. His witness report, the truthful one, the one a great many people had not liked, turned out to be the report that history wanted, because history, once the prefecture had decided the affair was a triumph, needed the security officer who had stood on the floor and vouched for the animal, and Ashek was that officer on the log with his name and his number attached, and so the same institutional current that reassigned Wren to a directorate swept Ashek up alongside her, and he found himself, at an age when most Sarek corporals were still dogging hatches, promoted to sergeant and posted to the new auxiliary liaison detail as its security element, which meant, in practice, that he spent the following years learning from a human supply clerk how to be around dangerous things without being a danger himself, and it was the best education of his life. He learned the method, or as much of it as could be learned. He learned to keep his voice level and his movement slow, and his word absolutely unbroken to anything he was trying to gentle, and he found, to his lasting surprise, that the method worked on more than apex predators, that it worked on frightened new recruits and panicking work crews and hostile bureaucrats, that the whole of what Wren had done in the low bays was really just the largest and most extreme application of a thing that was true everywhere. which was that trust is built in the thousand small moments where you could have broken your word and did not, and that a being which trusts you completely has room left over to be brave. He never made a bond of his own like Biscuit. Wren told him early and flatly that most people never would, that it was not a technique but a nature, and that his nature was to be reliable rather than to be gentle, which was a fine thing to be and a different thing. But he became, over the years, the most trusted security officer in the auxiliary service, the one they sent for when a thing was frightened and loud and one bad moment from becoming a disaster, and he was good at it. And he owed all of it to 19 minutes of walking behind a small human up a ramp out of the dark, learning what he was watching. And the reputation spread. That was the part that reached past the station, past the sector, out into the long, slow currents of galactic opinion, and it was the part that Wren liked least and could do nothing about. The footage had leaked, and footage like that does not stop leaking, and within a year there was not a client species in the coalition that had not seen a small human walk a Class 12 apex through a live cordon on a single word, and the thing that the Beast Corps had spent 30 years failing to do, a supply clerk had done with biscuits and patience, on camera, and the galaxy drew the conclusion the galaxy always draws, which is the frightened one. The old Cathali saying that Osk had quoted in the requisition office. The humans are dangerous because they make friends of monsters, stopped being a warning about human foolishness, and became a warning about human capability. And it spread, and it changed shape as it spread. And by the time it came back around to Care Vantes years later, it had hardened into something the frontier species said to each other in the flat voice people use for a real fear. Do not raise a hand to a human's animal, and do not, ever, make an enemy of a species that keeps monsters as pets and does it out of kindness, because a people who befriend the worst thing on a death world are not a people you frighten, and they are not a people you fight, and the thing you most do not want to learn. Out past the edge of the maps is what a human does to the being that hurts something it decided to love. The Coalition had asked Earth in the early years of the contact for soldiers. Ashek learned this later from the Directorate. In the dry way, institutions record their own miscalculations. The Coalition had made contact with the human worlds and taken their measure, small, soft-skinned, short-lived, physically unremarkable. From a scatter of worlds, the surveys had flagged as marginal to lethal and mostly written off, and had extended the standard invitation to a promising client species, which was an invitation to contribute soldiers to the Coalition auxiliary forces, and humanity had considered the invitation, and had sent, instead of soldiers, a small quiet contingent of logistics and supply personnel, because that was what the early postings called for, and the Coalition had noted the modest human contribution with mild disappointment and moved on, and had not thought about it again until a supply clerk on a depot above Anet made a friend of a monster, and the whole calculation had to be redone. They had not sent soldiers was the thing. Ashek thought about it often in the years after. Humanity had not sent its soldiers, and the Coalition had read that as weakness, as a species with little to offer, and had been comprehensively wrong, because the humans they sent were not soldiers, and were something the Coalition had no category for and no defense against, which was ordinary. They had sent their ordinary people. They had sent supply clerks and loaders and maintenance techs, the small, unremarkable people who fixed tickets and chased discrepancies, and were kind to frightened things on a schedule, because that was simply how they had been raised on their terrible little worlds, and it had turned out that ordinary human kindness, applied without fear, and without ceasing to the worst monster in the sector, was a strategic capability that a war corps could not match with 30 years and a leash. The Coalition had asked for soldiers and gotten supply clerks and only understood, far too late, that the supply clerks were the more dangerous thing, because you can meet a soldier with a soldier, and there is no meeting, anywhere in the surveyed galaxy, for a small tired person who walks down into the dark with a bucket and refuses, on principle, to be afraid of what she finds there. The auxiliary liaison detail grew, over the years, into something like a school, and Wren Ostrander hated running it and ran it anyway, because the directorate kept sending her frightened, dangerous things, and the only alternative to teaching people how to handle them was letting the directorate handle them the old way. And she had seen the old way, coiled up and abandoned on the transfer floor where a Cathali warden had set his leash down and walked off, and she would not go back to it. Ashek watched her teach a great many recruits over those years, and the thing that struck him, every time, was how much of what she taught them was aimed at getting them to stop trying to learn a technique. They came to her wanting the trick, the core method, the sequence of correct actions that would produce a bonded beast, and she spent most of her time with each of them slowly dismantling the idea that any such sequence existed. She would take them down to whatever frightened thing the directorate had most recently dumped on the detail, and there was always one. The galaxy was full of frightened, dangerous things, and word had gotten around where to send them, and she would make the recruits sit with her at a distance, doing nothing, for hours, for days, until they understood in their bodies what she could not put into their heads, which was that the work was not a thing you did to an animal, but a thing you did to yourself. A long, unglamorous discipline of becoming, in the animal's presence, the single most predictable and truthful fact in its world, and that there was no shortcut to it because the whole substance of it was the absence of shortcuts. "You're waiting for me to tell you the thing," she said to a young Ontu recruit once, a nervy, over-credentialed graduate of 3 handling academies who had come to the detail expecting to be impressive and had spent a week failing to get a frightened thing to so much as look at him. Ashek was there. He remembered it. "There isn't a thing. That's the thing. You keep coming in here wanting to be good at this, and wanting to be good at it is exactly what's stopping you, because the animal can feel you wanting something from it. And a frightened thing that feels you wanting something from it will never, ever trust you, because everything that ever heard it wanted something from it." She had nodded at the animal in the corner, which had spent the week pressed as far from the impressive recruit as the enclosure allowed. "You want it to need you. That's the core in you. Unlearn it. It doesn't need to need you. It needs to be able to stop being afraid, and it can only do that around someone who doesn't need anything back. So go sit over there and stop wanting to be good at this, and just be a boring, safe, truthful fact in the corner of its world every day for as long as it takes, and don't count the days, because the day you start counting is the day you've started wanting again." She had gone back to her manifest. She still kept a manifest, years into a directorate posting, because she was a supply officer in her bones and no reassignment ever changed that. "It's not a technique," she said to the recruit, to Ashek, to the room, the way she had been saying it for years. "It's a way of being a person. If you're not willing to become that person, go back to the core and get a leash. They work fine. They just don't get you the other thing." "What's the other thing?" the recruit asked. Wren looked over at the doorway, where a Class 12 apex predator lay in a patch of dome light with its scarred chin on the frame, asleep, at peace. 31 days and then years and years out from the incinerator it had once been minutes from, and something in her flat face went, for just a moment, soft all the way down. "The other thing is that one day it goes back into the fire for a stranger," she said, "and you stand there and watch it do that, and you understand that you didn't make it do it, that nobody could make anything do it, that it did it because it was yours and it wasn't afraid, and a thing that isn't afraid can afford to be good. And you understand that you gave that to it, that boring, safe, truthful presence you spent all those uncounted days being. That's what let it become the kind of thing that goes back for strangers." She picked her stylus back up. "The leash gets you a weapon that guards your body. This gets you that. Decide which one you actually want, recruit, and then we'll talk about days." She told Ashek about the mare, once, late, years into it, on one of the long, quiet evenings when the details work was done, and the frightened thing of the season had finally begun to trust the corner of its world. She told him about the world she came from, a cold, heavy world at the marginal edge of what the surveys called survivable, a world her family had farmed for 4 generations, because humans farmed the marginal edges the way other species did not, out of stubbornness more than sense. She told him about her grandfather, and the winter she was 9, and the storm-panicked draft mare that had gone into the drainage ditch and lain there a day and a night with a broken hock, huge and thrashing and lethal in her terror, and how everyone on the farm had said the sensible thing, the safe thing, the thing every rule and every instinct agreed on, which was to put the animal down before it hurt somebody. And she told him how her grandfather had listened to all of them, and agreed that they were probably right, and then gone down into the ditch anyway in the dark with a bucket of warm mash and sat with the mare for 6 hours, not touching her, not cooing at her, just being there, steady and quiet and unafraid, being the one true safe fact in the middle of the animal's terror, until somewhere in the 6th hour the mare stopped being a danger and started being an animal again, and led him near, and let him splint the hock, and walked out of the ditch at dawn leaning on a 9-year-old's shoulder. He said a thing coming out of the ditch, Wren told Ashek in the quiet. I've thought about it my whole life. He said, you don't kill a thing for being frightened, girl. Frightened isn't the same as dangerous. Frightened is just what dangerous looks like before somebody's kind to it. She was quiet a moment. Everybody on the farm knew the mare was dangerous. They were right. She was. A frightened draft horse can kill you and it's not even sorry. But my grandfather understood the part they didn't, which is that dangerous and frightened aren't 2 different animals. They're the same animal at 2 different moments, and the only thing that decides which moment you're standing in is whether anybody's willing to go down into the ditch. She looked toward the doorway, toward the sleeping apex. That's all I ever did, Sergeant. That's the whole thing the Directorate wants to bottle, and the Corps wants to systematize, and 19 client species have decided to be terrified of. I opened a cargo container and there was a frightened thing in it, and I remembered a man in a ditch, and I decided to be the one who was kind to it instead of the one who burned it. That's not a capability. That's not a weapon. That's just what my grandfather taught me in a drainage ditch when I was 9. And the terrible secret the Coalition's never going to get comfortable with is that every human they've ever met has some version of the man in the ditch behind them. And that's what we are, all the way down, under the supply uniforms and the modest contributions and the small, unremarkable faces. We're the species that goes down into the ditch. That's the whole of it. That's the thing you should tell them, if they ever ask you what humanity actually is. Ashek did tell them, eventually. He told a great many of them, over a long career, because he outlived his surprise but never his gratitude, and because he had learned from a supply clerk that the truest things are worth saying in a flat voice as often as anyone will hear them. But the picture he kept, the one that came to him unbidden in the quiet moments for the rest of his life, was not the cordon or the collapse or the great frozen quarter-second on the transfer floor when 30 weapons came up, and one small word put them down. It was smaller than that, and later, and it was the one he never told anyone, because it was his, and because putting it into words would have made it less than it was. It was an ordinary evening, years into it, at the end of an ordinary shift, and the transfer floor of Caervantes was doing what it did at the close of a day, which was to empty out slow and golden under the great dome, while the local sun came around the curve of Annet, and threw the whole cargo floor into the long, warm light of the station's manufactured evening. Ashek had come down to the floor for no reason he could have defended, the way he sometimes did, and he stood at the mouth of the ramp, the same ramp, though it had long since stopped meaning anything to anyone but him, and he watched the day end. The stevedore crews were breaking down the last pallets. The intake locks were cycling their final runs of the shift. And over by the requisition office, in the warmest patch of the dying light, a small woman sat on an overturned ration crate with a manifest slate across her knees, working through the day's discrepancies with a stylus, because she was a supply officer in her bones and no directorate, no rank, no year of galactic reputation had ever changed that. and asleep across the toe of her boot lay the most dangerous animal in the surveyed sector, its great scarred head heavy and still, its banded flank rising and falling slow, at peace. The floor moved around them, the way water moves around a stone. The crews had long since stopped noticing that they rooted themselves in a wide, unconscious arc around the sleeping apex and the woman on the crate. It had become as automatic as breathing, the etiquette of a station that had learned, in a single afternoon a long time ago, exactly what it was living alongside and exactly how to live alongside it, which was, quietly and with respect, and without ever once forgetting. Nobody was afraid anymore. That was the thing Ashek marked, standing at the ramp in the golden light. Nobody on the floor was afraid of the animal. But nobody had forgotten what it was, either, and the two facts sat together in the station's daily life without any friction at all. The way they sat together in the woman on the crate, who loved the thing at her feet completely, and had never for 1 second pretended it was anything other than what it was. The loader Anu came across the floor as he did at the end of every shift, broad and slow and gone gray at the temples now, and he crossed the whole width of the transfer floor to the patch of light, and he crouched. His knees were not what they had been, and he held out a single protein biscuit flat on his pink palm. And the apex of Annette opened one enormous eye, and considered the aging loader it had carried out of a collapse in its teeth so many years ago, and it lifted its heavy scarred head off the woman's boot, and it took the biscuit off Anu's palm as gently as it had taken every biscuit from every palm across all the years, and it set its head back down, and Anu stayed crouched there a moment with his empty hand still out and his old eyes bright, the way he always did, and then he rose, and touched the woman on the shoulder in passing, and went home. Ashek had seen it 1,000 times. It never stopped meaning what it meant. He thought, watching, about the induction card he had signed at his own posting all those years ago, the one that had told him in plain, cold language that nothing off Annette could be lived with, that the only safe response to a thing off the death world was fire and vacuum and the closed door, and he thought about how completely and permanently that card had been disproved, not by a weapon, not by a war corps, not by a bigger gun or a clever containment or a harder rule, but by a small, tired supply clerk who had opened a cargo container one ordinary day and found a frightened thing inside it and decided, against every rule that existed, to be kind to it on a schedule and never once break her word. 11 years of doctrine, a plaque full of dead survey teams, the whole architecture of a station's fear. All of it undone by a bucket of biscuits and the refusal to be afraid, and the undoing had been so quiet, so patient, so entirely without drama, that the station had needed a red alert and a live cordon and a collapse to even notice it had happened. The woman on the crate finished the last discrepancy, and thumbed the manifest closed, and sat for a moment in the golden light with her hand come to rest, without her seeming to decide it, on the great scarred head at her feet. She was not young anymore exactly, though she was a long way from old. The years had settled into her the way they settle into people who spend their lives being the steadiest thing in someone else's world, quietly, without applause. She looked still, like a person you would step around in a corridor and forget. That had never changed either. That was, Ashek had come to understand, the entire and terrible point of her, that the most dangerous capability the Coalition had ever encountered came wrapped in a small, unremarkable face you would not look at twice, and that this was true not only of her but of all of them, of the whole quiet contingent of supply clerks and loaders and maintenance techs that humanity had sent instead of soldiers, each one carrying somewhere behind their ordinary face a man in a ditch and a bucket of warm mash, and the plain, unshakable conviction that a monster is only a frightened thing that no one was ever kind to. The animal sighed in its sleep, a long, deep rumble that Ashek felt through the deck plates from 30 meters off, and it shifted and pressed its heavy head more firmly against the woman's boot, the way it had pressed it against her shoulder in the dark of a cargo bay on the worst day in the station's history, seeking the one fact in its world it had never once found wanting. And the woman looked down at it, and Ashek was too far to hear whether she said anything, but he saw her mouth move, and he had known her long enough by then to know the shape of the words even at that distance, because they were the words she had said on the floor that day, and the words that opened the standing order, and the words she had carried up a gravity well from a cold farm on a marginal world. And they were, he thought, the truest thing anyone had ever said aloud on Caervantes, or was ever likely to. You don't kill a thing for being frightened. Ashek stood at the mouth of the ramp a while longer in the long gold light, and watched the small woman and the sleeping monster sit together at the end of an ordinary day, easy in each other's company, the way only two things that have stopped being afraid of each other can be. And then he turned and went back to his own work, because there was always work, and because he had learned from her that the great things are held up by the small ones done faithfully, day after uncounted day. By people no one thinks to look at. Behind him, the sun came full around the curve of Annet, and the whole bright floor of the depot filled with the warm, ordinary evening light, and in the middle of it, a supply clerk sat with her hand on the head of the worst monster the coalition had a name for, and neither of them was afraid of anything at all. And that not the cordon, not the collapse, not the single word that stopped 30 rifles cold. That was the thing humanity had actually brought up the well to the stars. Folded small and quiet inside its most ordinary people, and set down gently in the light where anyone who cared to could have seen it all along. It came when she called it. It had always come when she called it. Its name was Biscuit, and she had named it because it stole crackers, and she had gone down into the dark for it when every rule said burn it, and it had never once forgotten, and neither in the end did anyone else.